株式会社ガンダムはガンド技術による医療事業を目指します。
Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff in the new year. It's been a while because we took a bit of December off. We took more of January off than we were planning. I say took off. We have been working consistently behind the scenes on Japanimation Station Season 2, Ufotable Moonworks, which is premiering Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2023. It's going to be great. It's a 13-episode season where we are looking at all of the Type Moon adaptations by Ufotable, including all of their Fate Stay Night anime and the Garden of Sinners, aka Kara no Kyokai. We have produced most of that season, and it is coming together well, so thank you, Weekly Stuff listeners, for letting us take a little bit of a break from the Mothership show, but we have not been taking a break from podcasting, so lots going on, but we probably just need to catch up and tell you guys what's been happening. Today on the show, we'll do a little bit of that, and then our main topic is also anime, because we have a type. And it is going to be a Weekly Suit Gundam extravaganza. Haven't had one of those in a while. On Mobile Suit Gundam, The Witch From Mercury, which recently finished its 12-episode first season and will be coming back in April for its second season. But between those seasons, we are going to review what we have so far. It's a good show. Lots to talk about. Sean, how have you been?
Because I mean, it's been a while since we did Weekly Suit, or Weekly Stuff, and Weekly Suit as well. And so it is weird. It's weird doing this podcast that I have to put in my head, the last 10 podcasts we've recorded have not come out yet. We didn't have a podcast. We were originally going to come back last week. We didn't have a podcast last week because I broke my streak. I had a really good streak going for a long time where I had not caught COVID-19. And then finally last week I did. Technically, I guess I got it about 2 weeks ago because it would have been I might have actually had it technically when we recorded the last podcast we did, which would have been 2 weeks ago. But yes, so I didn't have really bad symptoms, but the nature of COVID-19 is that even pretty minimal symptoms makes doing a podcast completely impossible, which I realized the morning last week when we were going to do the podcast. I was like, I should actually try to talk for maybe more than 2 minutes at a time to make sure that it's actually something I could physically do. And then I tried that and I was like, oh no, I can't do the podcast. And texted you just Jonathan, we're going to have to call the podcast off because it is not physically possible for me to talk for 10 minutes, more than 10 minutes. But now I'm mostly better. I still don't have my full sense of taste back. That is the weirdest part of it. I got that sort of symptom. But other than that, I didn't have a particularly bad time of it. It was just a fairly normal sore throat and cough kind of thing.
Well, you know what that means, people. I win. Of the Weekly Stuff hosts, I'm the one who held out the longest. I have not, to my knowledge, had COVID-19. You have. Haha, sucker. I win. I'm in the 15% of people left in America who hasn't had it. You're one of the loser 85%. I'm kidding. I don't actually think you're a loser.
Yeah, I mean, I was honestly shocked that I didn't get it earlier. Going back to teaching full-time in person in Texas, where if people are curious, there are no precautions at all, literally none. And so, it's just, it was completely inevitable that I would eventually get it. I basically threw my hands up to fate, and it's yep, there's nothing you can do at this point. And I'm
other than get vaccinated and boosted and get the bivalent COVID booster that you can get right now, which will keep you safe. It's free. Go get it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I did all that stuff, which probably is also one of the reasons why my symptoms weren't too bad.
Yes.
But even being vaccinated doesn't mean you're never going to get it.
But it means if you get it, you're gonna probably be okay. So
yes. Yes. But that is why we're a little bit later into January doing this podcast. But yeah.
Well, Sean, I am glad you're okay, and I am probably going to get it at some point, too, because I also teach less contact with students than you have, but also Iowa, no precautions. I can't wear a mask while lecturing. It's just not something I'm capable of doing. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm also vaccinated and boosted, so I will probably be okay. But who knows? Maybe someday in the future there will be one where we're reaching the point where almost everyone in America has had it. So who knows? Maybe soon we will find out who is naturally immune, and those people's blood will be taken for samples.
Yes, we will put them in a lab. We will dissect them. There was a while where I was like, maybe I'm just like naturally immune, just because like I've lasted longer than any other high school teacher I know. It's like because most high school teachers I know have had it a couple of times at least, like 2 to 3, if not more.
Jeez.
So I was like,
well, you're probably a little younger. You're healthy,
yes.
All that. Podcasting is good for the soul and for the body.
Exactly. Yeah, it was my natural podcast built throat immunity is probably what kept it as bay as long as it has.
That sounded dirty in some way that I'm not going to unpack. All right. So Sean, what else have you been up to? How has the, I say break, again, it has not been a break for us. We've been hard at work on all sorts of podcasts that you are going to hear starting in February, and we're very excited for that. But other than all of that, anything you want to chat about?
Well, because most of the stuff we did over the break, and most of the stuff I did was all kind of related to all the podcasts we've recorded, because we've gotten really, really deep down the Type Moon rabbit hole. At this point, which obviously I've already been down there for fucking ever. I've dragged you down there with me. But one of the things we did, and this will come up, we're going to do a podcast on it. It will definitely come up with top 10 video game stuff. Even though is it actually a video game is sort of a debate that one could have. But we played Witch on the Holy Night, also known as Mahotsukai no Yoru, which is a visual novel that originally came out about 10 years ago in Japan. That's from Type Moon, the people who make Fate Stay Night and that kind of stuff. And it is the first visual novel from Type Moon that has gotten officially localized into English. All their other stuff, like Fate Stay Night, has never technically been released in English. You can obviously play it through fan patches. But Mahotsukai no Yoru / Witch on the Holy Night, they did a remaster of it, basically sort of updating the art to make it high resolution and adding in voice acting, and they put that on the PS4 and the Switch, which just was timed perfectly to us doing these podcasts. And so at this point, we've both finished playing that game, and that game is awesome. I don't want to talk about it in depth yet, because we're going to talk about it on a whole episode and everything. But the other major thing I've done, which I haven't told you yet, Jonathan, is very connected to that. Because I got that was the first time in years I've played a visual novel, because playing visual novels is pretty hard to do when you're, working like a hard job and you have long hours and stuff like that, because you got to put time into a visual novel, because it's not a thing that you can sit down and do like 30-minute sessions of or something, the way you can kind of poke at a big game like God of War Ragnarok. I could play little sessions and kind of piece that together. Something like a visual novel, you got to do like an hour plus at a time to get through like a whole chunk of the story to get a good like point where you feel comfortable walking away from it. So it'd been a long time since I played one. I love Witch on the Holy Night so much. It's such a great visual novel. One of the best I've ever played. And there was another visual novel from Type Moon that came out last year. Obviously did not get localized into English, but I can read Japanese well enough that I could do it. And I had kind of held off on jumping down that rabbit hole, partially because I was kind of intimidated by playing visual novels again because of how big they are. But I did go ahead and I imported part 1 of the Tsukihime remake, which is a remake of the original Type Moon visual novel from 2000. And this is a complete remake. This is like, it is only 2 of the original 5 routes. They're going to do the other 3 routes in a second release later, but this release is longer than the original Tsukihime is, just with those 2 routes. So they've like added a lot of stuff. They've added in all the voice acting. They've redone the music. Like all the art is new. Like everything is completely new. It's a full top to bottom remake and reimagining of the original Tsukihime story, which I've never played through that original Tsukihime visual novel because it's so old and low budget that it's legitimately kind of hard to run on a modern PC and that kind of stuff, because it's so kind of archaic, and getting the music to work is a pain in the ass and all that kind of stuff. So I've never actually really done the full Tsukihime thing. And I'm most of the way through the first route, the Arcade route for Tsukihime, A Piece of Blue Glass Moon, and it is fucking amazing. Unfortunately, it is something that there is no English language patch for it. It's only on PS4 and Switch, so I don't know if that's like really feasible, because I think that probably makes it harder than it being on PC. Like you could probably emulate it on Switch if you wanted to, but I don't know how like fan patches and that kind of stuff are going for this sort of project. But it is a really, really great visual novel, and it was also a massive pain in the ass for me to get my hands on, because I went through a whole ridiculous process of where I was like, I've bought Japanese games on PS4 before, The main way you do that is you get point cards from something like Play Asia, where they give you a Japanese yen point cards, and you can use those to buy Japanese games on the Japanese PSN. One thing I didn't realize, though, after I bought some new point cards to go buy Tsukihime, is that apparently you cannot buy games of a certain rating if it's rated C or like Z on the Sero system or whatever that Japan uses. You need to have a Japanese credit card that proves how old you are and that you're an adult to be able to buy it, because Tsukihime is incredibly violent. There is some very gory, like, violent imagery in that game, so I kind of understand why it's rated very high. But I didn't realize that you can't they just don't let you do that. So you have to have an actual credit card with a Japanese bank. So I then had to import a physical version of the game. So I've been playing a disc copy. But part of that whole process then meant that I had a bunch of extra PSN points on the Japanese PSN, and I had nothing else to do with them. So then I was like, well, let me see what's on the Japanese PSN. Realized there is a port of Fate Hollow Atraxia, which is another Type Moon visual novel, the sequel to Fate Stay Night, on the Vita. And that's the only version of that game that has ever had voice acting. And so I was like, I should get that. But then I realized the Vita PSN store is super old and incredibly buggy, and trying to buy anything on it in Japanese, it just wasn't working on my Vita. So I still have all those points, but I also now have jailbroken my Vita so that I can just download that game, because there was like no other feasible way. I just couldn't get that store to work on my Vita. The American version did. The Japanese version just did not. So it was just like shit out of luck there. It's actually very easy to jailbreak your Vita, and now I've got like 1,000 visual novels on that thing, because I can also just use an SD card. And I've just been down a very deep, weird visual novel rabbit hole for the past like 2 to 3 weeks, really.
That's wonderful. I've been planning to do that. I've had some other stuff I've been playing, but I did get Tsukihime actually working on my Mac. It was easier than I thought it would be, but there was a version people had put together. And when I say Tsukihime, I mean the original PC from, 2001, like very, very 2000. Long ago. Because, as you say, the remake is not unfinished, but it's part 1 of 2, and then also is not. I'm really hoping they put that out in English. Maybe when part 2 comes out, and because they did Witch on the Holy Night, fingers crossed, that would be so cool. Because if it's got half the production values that the Witch on the Holy Night visual novel had, I will kill for that. But I still am excited just to look through this old one. And yeah, so I kind of want to go down that rabbit hole as well, because visual novels are cool, and Type Moon, I want to read all of this stuff because it's great. So I was actually going to ask you, Sean, are you going to read the Tsukihime remake? Because you can read Japanese, and it sounds like you are. So awesome.
It's fucking great. And yeah, it is like Witch on the Holy Night. It is just like the most well-produced visual novel ever. It is not as tight as Witch on the Holy Night because it's so much longer. I mean, this one is like 2.5 Witch on the Holy Nights in terms of length, basically. And so one of the things about Witch on the Holy Night is it's not a short visual novel necessarily. It's like 20-something hours. But relative to most visual novels that get to the 60, 100-hour length, if you're doing the whole thing and playing all the routes in those kinds of games, Witch on the Holy Night is really focused. And so there's just like so much production value in that game for like per minute relative to most other visual novels of that kind of budget size. And so Tsukihime is not quite as tight as that, but generally speaking, it is like that in the, I can't believe this exists. Like, this is so well produced. It feels like it has so much energy put into it in this genre, where like visual novels like this are very kind of rare these days, particularly something that is so purely a visual novel and has no real gameplay to it whatsoever. But just like the amount of art, the amount of music, there's like 100+ songs on the soundtrack in that game, and it's just part 1. There's like dozens of pages worth of unique artwork when you go into the archive and stuff like that. Like, it is so much art, so much voice acting, so much music, and it's just done to this incredibly high level. So yeah, Tsukihime is great, but obviously if you can't read Japanese, that one's a pretty high hurdle. But if people want to dip their toes into some visual novel stuff and get just like a really nice one that has these incredibly high level of production values, Witch on the Holy Night is about as good a visual novel as you could ask for, particularly if you're like a newcomer to the genre. I think that is like an amazing visual novel to start off with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and you will hear us talk about it on the top 10 next week and on It'll have its own episode in this season of Japanimation Station because it kind of goes with all. It's not an anime, but it's animated, and it goes with all of the. It'll be kind of a bonus episode at the end of the season, so we will talk all about it, and we're excited to. And maybe some other stuff in the future. Just so people know the podcast plans coming up. Yeah, next week we're going to be doing our top 10 games of 2022 at the end of January. A little late, but that's okay. You guys will wait for it. And I'm still like getting games in under the wire because I just finished playing Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion, the remake of Crisis Core Final Fantasy, which at first I thought, okay, this is a pretty straight remaster, right? This probably will not qualify for my top 10. It's enough of a remake that I think I will probably put it on there. And it is also one of my favorite games now. Like, I just easily maybe my favorite Final Fantasy. It's a phenomenal game.
Yeah, I haven't played it yet, the remake yet, but looking at video, that is a complete remake. Like, I think that's fair. I think that's it's obviously not as different as the Final Fantasy VII remake, which is just a different video game. Yes. But they have rebuilt that entire game from the ground up for this new version. Yeah,
graphically, it is all new. It's the same idea of the battle system, but they've changed a lot of the controls and how it works. Is my understanding. I don't think there's any major new content, and the level geometry and all of that is the same, but it is if you're wondering, it is substantially changed. There's also much more voice acting than the original had, all of that good stuff. It's fully voice acted. And I played it on Switch where it runs beautifully for a what is a new Unreal Engine 4 game. Really extraordinary how well it looks and runs on the Switch. Because sometimes those struggle. But especially in handheld mode, it just looks like the most fucking beautiful portable game you've ever played. It looks incredible. And obviously that is a portable game at its fucking heart. It's from that PSP generation of which, man, I'm starting to realize, even though I never owned a PSP, the PSP is one of my favorite fucking consoles ever because of all the cool stuff that got made for it, including a bunch of franchises that maybe their best game was some weird PSP spin-off like this or Metal Gear or Kingdom Hearts. Some people will say, I've never played Birth by Sleep, but I know some people will swear by that. Anyway, that's been fun. So you're going to hear a lot more about video games next week. We have a lot stored up to say.
Yes, although it is amusing that unless you count something like the 2 hours I played of Gundam Evolution, the list you're going to get from me next week is literally the 10 years that came out in 2022 that I played. Because I played a lot of video games last year, but it was mostly me playing most of the Resident Evil games, and I replayed all of the Half-Life I played a lot of video games last year. It's just only 10 of them were from 2022. They're all really good, although one of them maybe isn't technically a video game. But, if I've only played 10 of them, hey, it's going to get on that list.
Yeah, mine is more competitive, and I am having to think about definitions a little more because I do have quite a few more, but it's been fun. I also did, we are recording this on January 22nd, so Fire Emblem Engage just came out. Fire Emblem Engage, not to be confused with Fire Emblem N-Gage, the Fire Emblem game for Nokia's doomed handheld/cell phone from 2004. You remember the N-Gage, Sean?
Oh, I remember the Engage. I remember side talking. If you want to play Tomb Raider, there's no place better to go than the Nokia N-Gage.
If you are literally any younger than us and do not remember this, look it up. It's literally spelled N-Gage, and it's a hilarious fucking piece of kit from the early 2000s that looks completely ridiculous.
Yeah, it is definitely in that top tier level of I can't believe that this ever happened in video games kind of thing, It's just that it's before smartphones, it's smartphones settled a lot of shit. And there was that period where cell phones were still kind of evolving in their sort of technological style, and someone thought, what if you made a cell phone that was also trying to be a Game Boy? But it was more of a cell phone than a Game Boy. And it's I don't know if that fusion really makes that much sense. And it clearly didn't, because that thing lasted for less than a year.
It's hilarious. So, yes. But no, Fire Emblem Engage, the word engage as in to engage something, right? It's phenomenal. I'm loving it so much. I have not played enough where I want to do a full little review segment. Maybe we'll talk about it more next week. I am absolutely positive you will hear about it on our top 10 games of 2023 a year from now, because Fire Emblem has been in a weird and kind of wonderful zone where there's been a lot of Fire Emblem in the last 10 years. It went from the brink of death to then Awakening came out, and over the years after Awakening, it became one of Nintendo's like absolute biggest heavy hitter franchises, which it had never really been before. I mean, gosh, before Awakening, it had only been 10 years before it was first localized in the US, you know? So Fire Emblem became really big, and Awakening was my first one. It was a lot of people's first one, and I went back and played the ones before it. But like since Awakening, they've done a lot of games, and I've liked all of them, but the only one I've really loved was Fire Emblem Echoes, which was a remake of the second Fire Emblem Famicom game. And other than that, I think a lot of these sequels to Awakening, like particularly Fates and Three Houses, were just big and overstuffed, and I think lost some focus and had good moments, but kind of like, I think missed the core of the series in some ways. And Fire Emblem Engage sort of feels like the full-throated sequel to Awakening that I think I've been waiting for, is my initial reaction to it, and I am absolutely adoring it. The leap in production values from Three Houses to this one is insane. This is kind of one of the most like striking Nintendo original titles on the Switch, and Fire Emblem Three Houses felt kind of creaky in kind of its expansion from being it had been portable Fire Emblem for a while, and now we're kind of going to consoles. Engage, I think, threads that needle quite a bit better. It's extremely colorful, right on down to your two-colored anime boy or anime girl hero. But it's a cool game. I'm excited to talk more about that. I'm very much enjoying that and on my shit. So I finished Crisis Core the other day and then dived fully into Fire Emblem Engage, and I'm a very happy gamer. And I've got Persona 3 Portable just sitting there on my Switch, because the Persona games now are all out on Switch, and I am so happy. I booted that up and just played like the first 20 minutes in Japanese, because it's got the Japanese voices now, and I was just in heaven, and I can't wait to play that again. All sorts of good stuff.
Yeah, lots of good stuff out. Yeah, when Fire Emblem Engage, when the reviews hit on that, I saw like, a lot of people, either depending on what you were looking for, this is either a good thing or a bad thing, but a lot of people saying it's like, yeah, it's like the tactics stuff is really, really good, but it maybe doesn't have as much as the social stuff as Three Houses. And I saw that, I'm like, man, Jonathan's going to be a happy fucking camper with this one.
Yeah, and there's a way to oversimplify that, because I do like the social stuff, but I liked it in kind of, I think Awakening had the right balance where you have these support conversations that kind of flesh out your characters, and the world feels real. But it's not, there's an entire second game tacked onto it that you have to pay a lot of attention to. And I do think Three Houses, and frankly, I'm not trying to be like gatekeepy here, but I do think like the most fervent like fans of Three Houses were people who were not previously Fire Emblem fans and weren't as interested in the tactics stuff. And that's fine, and I'm glad that game is there for you, but also, like, getting a little bit more, I think Engage just, like, it does have a lot of the social stuff, but the balance is better so far. Just as soon as, frankly, I got to, like, level 3, and then it puts you in the world map, I'm like, oh, thank God there's a world map. We're traveling, we're going around the world. It's not, because Three Houses, you were stuck at the school. Even after the big time skip, you somehow just still go back to the school and nothing changes. And I just found that so frustrating in that game. It's great.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, so lots of good video games and lots of good podcasts coming your way. Do please pardon our dust, as we are still a little bit under construction with new podcasts in the weeks ahead. We will have the top 10 video games one next week. It might be a little spottier release schedule, and just the weekly stuff. I'm still not 100% sure what it's going to look like this year. I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to integrate the Japanimation Station segments, if at all. Whether those just stay on Japanimation Station, whether they get integrated here, it's just a little hard to know because those are all pre-recorded, right? And it depends on what we do with it. So do go subscribe to the Japanimation Station channel and podcast. There's lots and lots of good stuff coming. And I'm very excited for it. But yeah, so a little bit of a time of transition here. But thank you all for sticking with us.
Yes, and again, it is weird from our perspective because we've literally recorded more podcasts than we would have normally recorded over this period of time. Like, that's like we've been doing a crazy amount of podcasts. It's just they haven't come out yet.
And I'm loving it. I have to say, just a little bit of behind the scenes, how the sausage is made, pre-recording and kind of having like we know kind of where we're going with it and kind of doing the work ahead of time and making it, I think, as good as it can be, has been a lot of fun, and I'm enjoying that process a lot. And that, I think the first season, quote unquote, of Japanimation Station I'm really proud of the episodes, but I do think it felt like I don't think it was quite what we had envisioned for the show because it felt a little kind of disjointed and split up because of other recording constraints. And so I think this season is much more like, oh, this is exactly, I think, what we wanted this show to be. And it's going to air week in, week out for 13 weeks, just solid. And it's going to be really cool.
Yeah, and the amount of content from like a listener's perspective that each episode covers is like 1 to 2 movies, or like the most we do is Fate Zero. That show is, even that's only like basically 23 episodes in a row of anime. Yeah. So it's like, it's also a manageable amount for people. If you haven't started watching or any of that kind of stuff, or you're not yet in the world of Type Moon UFO Table, like it is also manageable enough that listeners will be able to keep up with it because it's very bite-sized chunks that we're covering in each episode.
Yep, and if you are someone who wants to do your anime homework and follow along with us, it's basically all on Crunchyroll. The Garden of Sinners is the first thing we're covering, and they are not only all on Crunchyroll, but they are in the correct order, and that's very nice, because that can be a confusing series to find the right order for, but just, you can find it, it's very easy. Then we're doing Fate Zero, it's all on there. English or Japanese, take your pick. Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works, all on there. For some reason, Crunchyroll has it listed just as Fate Stay Night. It is not Fate Stay Night, the 2006 anime. It is Unlimited Blade Works. They don't have the 2006 anime, which I actually just saw is getting its first Blu-ray release in the US this year. So if you want that. But no, Unlimited Blade Works is all there. And then the Heaven's Feel movies, not on Crunchyroll at the moment, but they are, you can rent them on like Apple TV and Vudu and all of that stuff. There are very expensive Blu-rays on Right Stuff. So it's all out there.
Yes. So I'm extremely excited to get that Japanimation Station Season 2 out, because it is the stuff we've recorded so far, which again is most of that season, is really, really good.
Yeah. And premiering Valentine's Day, because there's nothing more romantic than a good anime podcast.
You know, they're all love stories. You know, that's fundamentally, when you dig down to the core of Kinoko Nasu's writing for Type Moon, they're all love stories. So it totally makes sense. Maybe it's not as apparent on the episode that's going to air on Valentine's Day as maybe one of the least love story ones, but there's enough of a, you can see it. You can see it in there. It's just not all showed up yet.
I definitely did not know they were all love stories on the episode we recorded for Valentine's Day. I will tell you that, because this is definitely going back to Weekly Suit Gundam basics, where Sean knows this stuff very well, and I didn't know it at all, and that's always fun. But speaking of Weekly Suit Gundam, Sean, it's time for another of the original, the greatest, the Gundam podcast, because we got a brand new Gundam. You want to talk about the Witch from Mercury?
Yeah, Jonathan, let's talk about some motherfucking Gundam. Hello and welcome to Weekly Suit Gundam, the special bonus podcast brought to you by the folks at Japanimation Station. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And the beacon on the hill has been lit. The alarum in the woods has been sounded, Jonathan. Gundam has returned, and so have we. It has been a long time since we got to talk about Gundam, but finally, for the first time since we created Weekly Suit Gundam, and actually for the first time since Iron-Blooded Orphans, a new full AU Gundam show is out. I guess the full production is not yet done, but we have a full big core chunk of 12 episodes of a new Gundam show to talk about. That's right. We are here to talk about Core 1, or what is now being called Season 1, of Mobile Suit Gundam, The Witch from Mercury, also known as Suisei no Majo.
Or G-Witch, if you're online and you don't want to write the full title. The Witch from Mercury, Season 1. They're calling them Season 1 and Season 2 at Sunrise, so we can call them Season 1 and Season 2.
Yes, that is new information. That is like, as they started marketing the Blu-rays, all of a sudden they started calling it Season 1 and Season 2. It was not originally planned to be a Season 1 and Season 2.
No, although I think very fortunately the 12th episode acts as a great finale, even though I don't think it was originally intended to have a break here at all. Attested to by the fact that they are currently in Japan just airing recent Gundam movies in 30-minute chunks on TV to fill in space that I think they were contracted to provide anime for. So anyway, maybe, production, whatever difficulties behind the scenes, made for a fantastic show. Is that fair to say, Sean?
Yeah, I fucking love The Witch from Mercury. I think this is a great show. Obviously, this is a new scenario for Weekly Suit Gundam, other than maybe, arguably with the Hathaway movies, where we are now talking about a story that is in production, right? So we don't know where this is going to go. We can only talk about the 12 episodes that have been released, which is different than what we have done with Weekly Suit Gundam, because obviously for every previous episode, more or less, they are all shows that were already released and also that I had already seen, so I knew it was coming. Whereas we're all in the dark. Who knows what happens past the very, very ending of episode 12, where you're given like a very shocking and incredible moment to hang on. So it's like, can't speak to what in the end the overall show will be, but for these 12 episodes, I think this is a great anime. I think it is a great Gundam show that is doing all the things that I wanted this show to do based on what we saw to it when they were like marketing it ahead of time, where it is giving you a new take on the Gundam franchise. It's doing this whole interesting genre blend with this kind of Battle Academy style show that it is for more or less the first like 9 to 10 episodes. But then there is like the core and the heart of the show is still Gundam all the way through. And then when you get to those last about 3 episodes, particularly the final episode of the season, it is really fully, properly a Gundam show. And I think that kind of balance of genre is really impressive. I think the characters are so compelling and incredibly well done. I think it's got maybe like one of the best examples of character design for a show I have ever seen for anime. Like, I think the character design in this show is just like incredible, and every character is really vibrant. Every character looks great. All the performances are great. The writing is phenomenal. So yeah, I think this is just like a great, great, great show that I'm very excited to see where it goes, so that, because you can't fully put it into context yet. But for what we have, I'm fucking loving it.
I'm loving it too. Assuming this is going to run the same length as other AU Gundam shows, which I don't know about you, Sean. To me, this feels like the first quarter of a show, not the first half.
Yeah.
And we do not have confirmation on that, obviously. But this show has clearly been a success. So I would imagine that they are going to be able to go as long as they want. So assuming this is the first quarter, I think if I hold this up to other AU Gundam shows, I think other than Gundam 00, this might be the best first core any of those have had. I think this is a better first core than Iron Blooded Orphans had. I think it's a better first core than Gundam Seed had, where that's the weakest part of Gundam Seed. It kind of gets better after that point. If you look at some of the ones from the 90s, I think this has a stronger start than some of those. And I wasn't actually 100% sold on it watching it week to week. I think because just for whatever reason, there are other things going on, maybe hard to focus. I wasn't quite feeling the shape of the show as well. And then I rewatched the whole thing in the week leading up to us recording this, just so I could get like, what's the binge feeling like I've done with other Gundams. And it actually, I think when I watched it that way, I was shocked at just how well structured this season is. It's basically 4 arcs of 3 episodes apiece. I have come up with names for all 4 arcs. We'll talk about them later. And I think the internal structure of it, of how each of those 3 episodes kind of introduces a topic or a theme or a plot point and kind of brings to some kind of resolution to kick off into the next arc, is really interesting, and how each of them play with different genre ideas and character ideas, leading up to this really shocking and impactful finale where the show fully becomes a Gundam show in ways you expect and in ways you maybe don't expect. And I think it's really interesting on that level. And then everything you said, Sean, I would say this is one of the best animated Gundam shows, bar none. This this looks amazing. I think the character animation in particular is just tremendous. When you get to the final episodes and they're in space, it's maybe the best zero-G animation Gundam has ever had. The battles are very good, even though I would not call this an action-heavy Gundam yet, especially because the action through all the school stuff is low stakes in the sense that no one's going to die in those scenes. But when it's there, it is very well done. The music is 100% inherits the legacy of Gundam shows have the best music on TV when they're airing. Because this aired in a really good core. The winter fall season of anime 2022 was really good. This had the best music. This was tremendous. And yeah, it's just a very, very good show so far. Off to a great start. Feels like it has a lot of room to run after this point, and I'm excited to see where it goes. Hopefully in the next 3 seasons, because of how they're calling these. I assume this is a Gundam show that is somehow going to have 4 seasons, but whatever. I'm excited to see however they make it.
Yeah, and I'm with you that while they haven't said whether or not there's anything past the 24 episodes currently announced, my assumption is that it probably will have a quote unquote seasons 3 and 4. And especially because G-Witch is massively popular. It is a huge hit, both on streaming for anime, but particularly in Japan. It is a massive success. Like the aerial gunpla has been sold out consistently, from what I understand, since the show started, including some of the other mobile suits they've done. There's a crazy number of big merchandising tie-ins that have been hugely successful. Every single episode, as it has come out in Japan, has like dominated the trending in Twitter, with character names, with quotes of lines from the episode. Like, it is a hugely successful show, and it has been clearly very successful at bringing in new viewers to Gundam, which is part of the reason why it is this sort of weird genre blend, is that it is an intentional sort of attempt to try to expand the audience for Gundam, because Gundam's a very old franchise at this point, and particularly in Japan, where it has that level of sort of like cultural, background, where everybody knows what Gundam is, even if, most modern Japanese people have not necessarily watched a Gundam show. They're aware of Gundam, right? They know what a Char is, they know what a Gundam is, they know what a Zaku is, but it's super old. And so this has been, I think, very successful at bringing in a new generation of anime fans, particularly in Japan, into the franchise, which I know from watching all of my VTubers, which if you've listened to the Sean birthday podcast, you know all about VTubers as well. But basically, they're Japanese streamers that use avatars to do their streaming. And I watch a lot of those. They're mostly women that are probably in like their 20s. And none of them are like big Gundam fans coming into it. But the show, because it was so popular, most of the VTubers I watch, I have seen bunches of clips of them commenting on watching different episodes of G-Witch or being surprised by the finale and stuff like that. So it's been a huge success in Japan. And it has been very fun for me watching the show to kind of follow along with that, because this is the first Gundam obviously coming out like this since I got into Gundam, let alone since we got into Gundam as for the podcast, like just completely for me for Gundam, because it had been so long since Iron-Blooded Orphans. And I don't usually watch anime week to week. I eventually made the choice for this one pretty quickly that I had to watch it week to week, or else I would get completely spoiled, because the internet knows me. The internet knows that that I like Gundam. If there's one thing the internet knows about me, it's that I like Gundam. This is our 60th episode of this fucking podcast. I do lots of research for every episode of this podcast. It's like the internet knows this well. So like everything, it was throwing me G-Witch stuff immediately as soon as that first episode went up. And so I watched it week to week. And I don't think it is like a great week-to-week show in the sense of, like, I'm not surprised, Jonathan, that you had like a kind of a slightly more mixed reaction watching episodes week to week, because I don't think that structure works that well. Like because you get some, and just looking at it as a weekly based show, some of those episodes are great episodes in and on of themselves, but lots of them are more, here's a setup for the next episode. Here's the build up to the big fight you're going to see next episode. And that's not a super satisfying chunk of story to watch. And this is kind of like how I feel most weekly anime are structured. And it's why I don't watch anime weekly, generally speaking. There's some stuff like a Kaguya-sama or Spy Family Season 2 I ended up mostly watching weekly, actually. But that's because those are like comedy. They're nicely structured week to week. G-Witch I don't think necessarily has that, but what it does have for the weekly viewing experience is like the show is so popular and it's so good at kind of grabbing the audience's attention with like interesting plot twists and great characters and really sharp writing for the dialogue, that like it going trending on Japanese Twitter consistently in like 5 or 6 different ways every single episode meant that it was really fun to follow the conversation around the show and the fan art. And like I've been listening to the radio / podcast show they do with Ichinose Kana and Lin, the two voice actors who play the two leads of the show. And so like being able to follow along with all the kind of periphery around the edges of Witch From Mercury has been really fun. And that has made the weekly viewing experience for me worth it. But yes, I did, like a week or two ago, once the whole show was aired, I sat down and over the course of 2 to 3 days, I rewatched the whole show in 3 to 4 episode chunks. And as a show, it plays so much better that way. And I'm with you that I think the structure of the show is actually really tight and really sharply designed. It's very smart with how this kind of built out these story arcs of like 2 to 3 episodes. And when you can watch it in those chunks, I think the show on its own merits really shines. And it would be the thing that if we had watched it as a normal Weekly Suit Gundam thing, it would have never even occurred to me what the weekly experience would have been like, because it would have just been, oh, this show is so well designed to be seen in like really manageable hour to 90-minute chunks of episodes.
Yeah. It's been super cool, and I've enjoyed some of the periphery as well, just waking up on Sunday mornings, and Twitter is already alight with memes and quotes, and often it will have aired by the time I wake up, and I'll get up and there will be something that, like, I guess Suletta's mom did something this week because people are tweeting about it, and then I watch the episode and I'm like, she did do something this week. It's been great. I remember before this aired, I just, from the prologue, which we have a separate episode on, by the way, if you want to hear us talk all about the episode 0 prologue, you can go listen to that, episode 59 of Weekly Suit Gundam. But from that, from some of the advertising, and just that, like, anime in North America has gotten a lot bigger since Iron-Blooded Orphans aired, and just a lot more accessible, because I think Iron-Blooded Orphans, I don't know if that was even technically a simulcast at that point of like day and date. It might have been, there were still some shows on like a week or two delay. I don't know what the case with that one was. But like, you know, it's just a lot more part of the culture. And I remember saying on Twitter, like, I wonder if G-Witch is going to like break through in a way other Gundams maybe haven't in North America. And some people called me, they're like, you're crazy. Gundam doesn't break through like that. It'll get big once it's done, blah, blah, blah. And I just am here to tell you, you're fucking idiot. This show broke through huge. Like, clearly, you know, obviously huge in Japan, also very big here and around the world. It clearly had an impact. Like, I saw way more Gundam discussion on my timeline than I generally have, even knowing that, like, again, the internet knows me too. I like Gundam, but there was a lot.
Yeah, like in compared to like when Hathaway came out and stuff like that. Like you saw some and you saw, but
Yes.
you only saw like Gundam people coming to it. I think the big thing with this is that like it's non-Gundam people also. It's like it is both satisfying existing fans, but people who were not previously fans of Gundam can come to G-Witch and fall in love with the characters and the world. And then, you know, and then it slowly turns the Gundam dial up and they're like, holy shit, what the fuck is this thing? Because also, like, in general, when the Gundam stuff happens at the end of this show and it gets a lot more dark and it gets much more violent, like, what I have seen in terms of the reception is that the people who got into it for the, like, cute girls and that kind of stuff, they're still into it, right? That didn't like drop them out of the show or something because it's like, oh, you went too far. I think the show is well designed to sort of like get you into that world, used to this style. And then when it pulls the rug out from under you, you're still so invested that you're going to continue on with it, even if it means probably the second season is not going to have as much fun, goofy antics with Suletta and Miorine, and that kind of stuff is probably going to be less prominent in season 2, would be my guess.
It would be weird if it wasn't. It'd be weird if there was more goofy antics after this point, I have to say. That might be a little bit of tonal whiplash. But no, I agree with that completely. And I think, you know, just looking over all the AU Gundam shows, this one is, I think, by far the easiest to recommend just to anyone. Mm-hmm. Like, if you are just generally a fan of it, this like crosses so many anime boxes and genres and I think audiences. This is a very easy recommend in a way like, Iron-Blooded Orphans is fantastic, but I have to tell you, that's a heavy show, and like you have to know this, and this going into it, right? If you've never watched Gundam. Gundam 00 is the best AU Gundam show, but it like even then, I think that one's like fairly accessible, but it does have a little more of like Gundam iconography it's playing with that I think you'd want to know. You know, G-Witch does have, I think, maybe the most overt Char-clone we've had since Gundam Wing, but I don't think you need to know that to enjoy Suletta's mom, Lady Prospera, as a character, you know? So this is just like a super, super accessible show as someone's first Gundam.
Yeah, and it's been very fun following it along in that way. Before we get into the show proper, one thing I want to share, my favorite fan artist, I'm going to also post for you, Jonathan, in the chat here, the link to this so you can see it. Unfortunately, this is all only in Japanese, but like the art is so cute and good that I think even if you don't know Japanese, you can enjoy these. My favorite Twitter person, like our manga artist who has done a whole daily series where every single day he posts up a new image of this is Yamada Dojin, Yamada _ Dojin, Doujin. Also, Yamada Ichizoku is actually what his name is in Japanese in terms of his profile. He has done this whole series of fan, like, kind of 2-panel comics where he has taken Suletta, turned her into a cartoon tanuki, which is part of the joke around Suletta as the main character is that she's very tanuki-esque. And it's just the most adorable, heartwarming manga I have ever seen. And every single day when the new one gets posted in the morning, it just fills me with joy that he just takes scenes, and he's now wrapped all the way around. And he's doing scenes from the first couple of episodes because he didn't start this right at the beginning of the show. Obviously, started a couple episodes in once he became a fan. But he picks like big iconic moments from episodes and turns them into like goofy, funny, adorable little moments of everybody just sort of like going head over heels for how cute and adorable little cartoon tanuki Suletta is. And there's so much great fan art. This is my favorite stuff. I think these are so good. But just top to bottom, it is the thing I'm going to miss the most in the like 3 to 4 months between seasons is not just getting such a ready dose of really good cool or funny or weird or goofy fan art, because the fan community around G-Witch is so active and vibrant and creative. But if people have not seen the Yamada Dojin stuff and you like G-Witch, you owe it to yourself to go look them up on Twitter because they're so fucking good.
This is amazing. And Sunrise, if you're listening, I think for seasons 3 and 4, if you need a break between cores, hire this guy and make a team to do like a Chibi Gundam Witch 13-episode season just of Tanuki Suletta and her adventures. Make an anime out of that in the middle. I want that. That'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, this guy he took all of his, the things he had made and put them together into a little doujin magazine and sold them at the Winter Comic Con. And it's like, I've never been more jealous because it's like, I so desperately want just like a physical book of all these like goofy chibi comics.
Yeah.
But yes, but this is just more to also illustrate in general how cool the fan community, I think, around G-Witch has been, because I just think it's inspired so much great fan content that has been one of the things for me that is different about the show, partially just because it's like the internet is so much different now than it has been for previous Gundam shows, even just with like Iron-Blooded Orphans, you know, like this kind of stuff is much more easy to access in everything than it was back then, particularly over here. And then also just for me, the first time I've been able to follow something like this as each episode is coming out. And so that has been part of like a distinct joy of G-Witch for me.
Absolutely. It's been very cool, very fun, different experience, but a wonderful one. So let's go ahead and dive in. And we've stayed spoiler-free so far. I think from this point on, spoilers are fair game. So if you have not yet watched G-Witch, please go watch it. I think you will enjoy it. It's a blast. And then it is sad. But, you know, it's a great show, and I think you're going to love it. But from here on out, spoilers abound. We don't usually make that warning on Weekly Suit Gundam, but since this is a brand new show, I feel like we probably should. So there you go. Sean, take it away. What are we talking about next?
Yeah, so I'm just going to do a quick recap of some of the production stuff behind the show, partially because there's some stuff we know now that we didn't in the prologue episode, and also in case people don't remember or didn't listen to our episode covering the prologue, let's go over a little bit of the behind-the-scenes stuff. So the two main creative figures to look at in terms of this show are the director, Hiroshi Kobayashi, who his best known stuff is probably he was the director for the show Kisniver, which is a Studio Trigger show. And then he also did the show Dragon Pilots, Hisako in Minotan, I think is the name of that show, or Misotan, which I have not watched that one. I've watched Kisniver and I like that. But so those are the two main shows he's directed. Dragon Pilots is sort of a mecha like adjacent show. He's also worked on other Gundam projects before in the past, doing storyboarding for stuff like Iron-Blooded Orphans. The really big name for this show, though, is the writer, Okoji Ichiro. He has done a lot of stuff, with his biggest thing by far being he is the writer for the Code Geass series. He's like the writer and effectively the creator of Code Geass, which I still have not actually gotten around to watching Code Geass, because instead of watching Code Geass, I watched something else that Okoji was involved in that is also G-Witch adjacent, which he is the writer of the light novels for Revolutionary Girl Utena. So he's not the creator of the Utena series, but he's like one of the creators in the broader multimedia project of Utena, just not like the anime, which is the original thing for that project. And you can see there are lots of sort of broad references to Utena in the first episode, which like a lot of people started pointing out on Twitter. And I had not seen Utena at that point, and I did watch it. Utena is fucking amazing if people are curious. It is, if you want to watch a really good anime, Utena is probably one of the best anime I've ever seen. It's not necessarily like mandatory viewing for G-Witch or anything. The references are very broad. It is not like, oh, they're pulling all this stuff from Utena. It's one of like 1,000 things that G-Witch is kind of putting into a blender and mixing together in terms of its influence. But, it is definitely a part of that, and it's part of the background of the creator, Okochi, who has also done some other stuff that has, like, that you would broadly put into the Yuri genre of anime, which is, like, girls' love, basically, right? Yuri is, if you like, two girls who fall in love over the course of the show, right? Either they literally do, or they're, like, it's kind of implied that they are, even if it's not going to actually show it, because depending on the era that kind of show comes out. Like, Utena very much falls into that category, where it's basically a Yuri show about the two main characters falling in love. Even if in the TV show they don't get super explicit about it, it's still very much part of, like, the DNA of that show. And G-Witch is in that broad genre, as well as including some of the Battle Academy stuff, which, even though I have not seen Code Geass, I know that it's like a mecha show that is set at a school. Obviously, some of that stuff is in G-Witch also. Some of the other stuff we know about the show now that, that wasn't known at the time is that the show did have a fairly troubled production. Not because, from what I understand, anything was mismanaged, but because, like, this is a very, very fucking hard show to make. So if you look at the credits, it is crazy how many different studios helped out and how many different people jumped in and helped out, like big animators, like some of the stuff. The beginning of that big chase scene in, I think it's episode 11, or maybe it's episode 10, between Miorine, it's 11, between Miorine and Suletta, where she comes out of the bathroom. Some of that was animated by the people who worked on the Hathaway movies, who are like old school animators and stuff like that.
And you can tell, because that is one of the most impressive pieces of TV animation I've ever seen.
Yes, and there's like lots of stuff like that throughout the whole show, where so many people came together at Sunrise and at other studios to like make this show work, partially because G-Witch is a particular rarity these days, and that is very insistent upon using 2D animation for the mecha stuff, like 99% of the time. It's very rare that they do a shot where they use 3D. It happens every once in a while, but the vast majority of mecha is rendered in 2D in the show, which there are not lots of animators anymore that have that kind of specialty, right? Like, if animating something like super complex and geometric like a mecha is a real particular skill set for an animator, and it's just, not lots of animators have that specialty anymore. There aren't many mecha shows. Most mecha stuff that comes out, they just use 3D because 3D is much more naturally suited to animating something like a mech or a car or things like that, even if there's, obviously, I think we all recognize that there's a lot of value out of trying to express those things in 2D animation. There are things that 2D animation can do with mecha that 3D can't. And so the show's insistence on using that 2D stuff is also one of the reasons why the production is troubled in terms of, they almost certainly, they have not said this, but I think it's very easy to read between the lines and see that it was not meant to have a split core originally, and there was going to be a 24-episode run straight through. There was one point over the course of the season where they did delay an episode by a week, and then right at the home stretch, there were 2 weeks that got delayed not because of production stuff, but because the channel that they aired on had different New Year's specials and things like that took up the time slot. But if you assume this had like a totally smooth production with no delays in the original running, if it had gone through, those New Year's special things would have arrived right the week after episode 12, which would have made the 2-week break between part 1 of the season and part 2 of the season, which that to me makes perfect sense. That clearly to me is what the original plan was going to be. At some point before the airing of season 1, they announced, hey, it's going to be a split core. They then also announced, as you pointed out earlier, Jonathan, that they have chunked up stuff like the Gundam Hathaway movies into a TV version to air to fill the gap between season 1 and season 2. And season 2 is just airing in the spring season for 2023. So it's only off for one season, quote unquote, of anime. And so it is, to me, it's pretty evident that it was originally meant to be a consecutive 24-episode run with a couple-week break there in the middle. But for those kinds of production reasons, it has now become a split core. Now, all that being said, I think the experience of watching the show, none of that is evident. Like, it is not a show that looks troubled in any way, shape, or form. It is one of the best-looking TV Gundam shows. It's one of the best-looking shows from that season in anime. is one of the best looking TV Gundam, like if not arguably the best looking TV Gundam. Like I think it holds its own against anything else. So it's like they have managed the show incredibly well. It's just, I think, a very hard kind of show to make these days and the way they're trying to make it. And most shows, most anime are not doing 24 consecutive episode runs. Even Spy Family didn't do that. You know, like it is becoming much more the trend to do 12 episode chunks and then breaking it up that way. You know, we're far away from the days when you would expect shows to run for a whole year and do your 50 episode thing just straight through. Now, even like a 24 episode thing with the level of quality we kind of expect from TV anime, that's not super feasible anymore either. So that's one of the things that, you know, was not apparent about the show the last time we talked about it for the prologue. But I do think it's interesting kind of seeing the way that Sunrise has sort of like used all of its resources to really like make sure that G-Witch can be the best it can be. And also like finding smart ways to delay or break it up into manageable chunks so that the production can be as good as it is for the audience watching it.
It's really striking if you look at the list of, you talk about the list of credits and you can, especially if you can like read katakana, you can count the studios that they were bringing in to work on this thing. But also if you look at the credits, it's amazing how over the course of the season, the director and storyboard credits balloon. That's not super unusual for storyboard credits. You will often, for heavier episodes, have multiple people boarding for different sequences, because maybe one sequence just is much more demanding than sort of a normal dialogue exchange, right? But for the directing credits, there are 2 episodes, 8 and 12, that have 4 credited episodic directors. And then most of the episodes in the second half of the season have 2 or 3. So like that also just tells you, because what that means, that doesn't mean that there were 4 directors in the room looking over everything. It means that like sequence based, you were breaking it up and like this person was overseeing this sequence, blah, blah, blah. And I think that makes sense when you look at the episodes that have that many people in there. But it's wild. And yeah, it does not come across in the finished show. The finished show is one of the most, as you say, polished Gundam productions easily. But yeah, and obviously we're in a period where G-Witch is not the only anime that, troubled or not, there's a lot of anime that are having production issues also because of outsourcing and what other Asian Pacific countries are going through with COVID or whatever. Like we just got the news this morning that the Nier Automata animation is going off the air indefinitely after episode 3. So, you know, this is happening. Attack on Titan, the final season, part 3, is becoming a split core thing, even though that core should only be like 6 or 7 episodes total. It's crazy. So there's a lot of shows that are going through sort of growing pains, but I think it makes sense when you look at how ambitious this one is and how fucking good it looks. Like those last couple episodes where you have 4 directors credited and 4 storyboard artists, sometimes that might indicate a troubled, you know, behind the scenes and that the episode might be messy. Those are production-wise the most impressive of the season. So, yeah.
It's the opposite effect of like Gundam Wing, where even if you didn't know in Gundam Wing the behind the scenes stuff of, oh, the guy who directed the first like 15 or so episodes like got kicked off the show and they had to bring another dude in to finish it off, like you can feel with that show that's like, oh man, they just lost sight completely of what the fuck they were trying to do with it. Whereas with G-Witch, it really feels like the experience is, this is like such a like talented team putting this product together. And so it's like, if it were not for the fact that, one, the show is airing weekly, so it's a lot easier to hear some of this production stuff in real time than it is when we're talking about something that aired in the 90s. Like, if it wasn't for that, like, I don't know if, like, some of that stuff would even really come up in conversation. Like, if you imagined we did Weekly Suit Gundam 10 years later and G-Witch was just, like, an older Gundam show, I don't think it would ever occur to me that this show would have had production issues.
Yeah, you know, it's great, because I think that they made that announcement that they were like cutting up Hathaway and Narrative Gundam and Thunderbolt Gundam for TV to fill, like, basically probably to fill like a contractual obligation, because they couldn't make a new anime to go in that slot that fast, that the network probably couldn't find something else to air for 12 weeks. And you go, oh no, is the show going to be okay? And then very quickly, I think you realize, oh, it's fine. They're doing, it's hard work, but it's fine. It looks great. It plays great. The scripts are extremely solid. All of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's our behind the scenes production stuff. Where do you want to start with the show proper, Jonathan?
Well, just talking about that structure, as I said, it occurred to me, because when I was watching it week to week, there were a couple of things where I felt like, is the show maybe having some little like plot cul-de-sacs, or there are more plot turns than I kind of like. For instance, so the first 3 episodes, you have a duel with Guel Jaturk in episode 1, and you have another duel with Guel Jaturk in episode 3. You know, you have sort of that middle arc where they're kind of getting to know the Earth House, and then you go immediately back to, is this a Gundam? And now we find out it is a Gundam, and then they're forming Gundam, but then after they form Gundam, Shadik wants to come fight. But then I kind of, as I said, I watched it, and you did the same thing, kind of all in one binge. And it became very clear how internally structured this thing is into, and I think it's very intentional when you look at these 3-episode chunks. So you have your first 3 episodes, what I've dubbed the Guel is a loser arc, where you have Guel Jaturk get absolutely bodied twice in a row, but in the middle you have this whole debate where Miorine comes in and sort of commits to Suletta the way Suletta has committed to her. And I actually think it's a very well-balanced arc to kind of have these 2 fights, one of which is a spur of the moment thing, and one of which is a result of a commitment between these 2 characters. You then have episodes 4 to 6, Elan's Happy Birthday arc, where you have this is sort of focused on 2 things: the relationship between Suletta and Miorine and Earth House, which they wind up joining, and we meet all of those characters, and then Suletta with Elan Karis, the character who tragically gets vaporized in episode 6. Well, we actually don't know this person's actual name who gets vaporized, but Elan Karis is like clone person. Then you have episodes 7 to 9 where they form Gundam. They're kind of making these long-term goals. You have Shadik as kind of steps into the spotlight as an antagonist, an inevitable antagonist, because that dude is clearly a piece of shit from the beginning. Yeah. He's just a pretty boy. And so you have that. And then finally you have the Suletta's insecurity / murder arc, where we go into space and we get a ship, and basically we get all the pieces of Gundam iconography in one place, where they're flying in space, they have a ship, we're in 0G, we have the scene where 2 people who are in love crash in 0G together, and their bodies spin a little bit, and then they hug. You have that, and then you have the moment of murder at the end of the season. And I think just looking at that and how those 3-episode chunks are structured to kind of each tell and focus in on a certain facet of the story, of the themes, of different genre types, like episodes 4 to 6 are by far the most kind of everyday life at school stories, but they are also where we get the first real hint outside of the prologue that, right, this is a fucking Gundam show, because what happens to Elan is so fucking tragic, but nobody else knows it happens. And so I think that play with genre is very fun. 7 to 9, you get another kind of wrinkle in the mix of kind of what genre ideas we're playing with. You get more of a focus on Miorine there, whereas 4 to 6 were more Suletta focused. It just is a very well-structured season in a way that I wasn't fully aware of while it was airing.
Yeah, and for me, looking at it, like, I more or less break it down the same way you do. For me, I thought of it more as, like, you have 2 episodes, like, basically a part 1, part 2 episodes, and then there's, like, a break episode between them, right? Because you have episode 1, which is totally standalone, then episode 2, which sets up the fight in episode 3, episode 4 is standalone, episode 5 sets up the fight that's in episode 6, episode 7 standalone, episode 8 sets up the fight in episode 9, 10 is standalone, 11 sets up the fight that's in episode 12, which is the same basic structure, but it's like how that 3 parts breaks down very consistently. And the other thing it does is that in episode 1, it sets up your 3 boys. It sets up Guel, it sets up Elan, and it sets up Shadik. And then the rest of most of the season is then walking through each of them. You deal with Guel, then you deal with Elan, then you deal with Shadik, and now now Gundam is here, right? Then the rest of the school stuff kind of totally breaks down at that point. And I think there are so many things like that where the sort of top level structure of the show is really sharp and really well thought through and considered, even if it does mean, I think, watching it 1 episode at a time, week to week, makes that a little bit hard to see that structure, especially, because you're doing other stuff for the rest of that week. You're not just sitting there thinking about that 1 episode of G-Witch you watched.
Right.
So it's easy to kind of lose sight of what that structure is doing. But when you're able to break it down and watch it in chunks like that, I think, the elegance of the plotting really comes through. And this show moves through a lot of plot stuff. I saw people criticizing it while it was airing, feeling like it was moving too slow. But it's when you look at the show, and you're able to watch it in those chunks, it's no, it moves through so much stuff because the school part of the show is basically done by episode 6. because once you move to Shall We Gundam, the greatest title for any episode of a Gundam show of all time, episode 7, that's where
I am so mad that that is not the title of our podcast. I am so fucking angry that this had not aired yet and we couldn't just have taken that and Weekly Suit Gundam. I like the title Weekly Suit Gundam. If this show was called Shall We Gundam and every show started with you, Sean, leaning into the microphone and going, Shall We Gundam? And then we went into the theme song, that would be fucking amazing.
It would be amazing, and it's such a good title. It's a great episode, and that's the episode that sets up the Gundam Company, you know?
Yes.
And that's like, at that point, you're very well out of this is the fun school show, you know? It, like, the style of the plots becomes totally different. And so, yeah, like, I think this show actually moves really quickly through like a lot of really interesting ideas, and then it spends 2 to 3 episodes on that idea, and then it moves on to the next thing. And that is one of the many things about this show that I think kind of puts you a little bit off your guard, because the school setting naturally sets you up to expect a much more sort of like normal episodic structure, that it would just run through the same routine every single episode, the way that like something like Revolutionary Girl Utena does, which has 2 kinds of episodes. It's got comedy episodes and plot episodes, and those episodes follow the exact same structure. And if it's like a plot episode, other than when you get to the very end and it gets you like, okay, these episodes are going to be a little bit more special, every single one of the plot episodes of Utena is you set up whoever the antagonist is going to be in the first half of the show, they challenge Utena to a duel at the middle point of the show, then she has the fight at the end of the show, and then it resolves the plot. And that's, you know, and it's got a very comfortable episodic plot-based structure like that. This is not doing that. This is sort of like giving you tastes of that kind of genre and using up that idea, and then it moves on to the next thing. And that's because it's really what it is doing is it needs to get to, and this is a Gundam at the end. And that's like part of the reason it's moving through those plots that way, is because really underneath everything, you have this tension of understanding that outside of the kind of sheltered world that the main characters are experiencing, Gundam is out there. And like war and violence and despair and all those things, like the themes we know of Gundam are like wolves at the fucking gates, and you can hear them howling throughout this episode, and it gets louder and louder throughout the season till you get to episode 11, where you're like, for me, after watching episode 11 real time, I was like paralyzed with fear of like, oh God, I don't want to see anything bad happen to any of these characters because I love them all so much. And then episode 12 is the gates get broken down and the wolves come in, and it's a bloody fucking affair. And like, what a great structure for a season of TV that is.
Phenomenal. And I think when you compare it to other AU Gundam shows, I would say for most of the AU Gundam shows, the first core is probably the weakest stretch. I would say that for almost all of them, other than maybe like Gundam 00 is just so consistent, and I think it has a similar, like right out of the bat, has a sense of itself and a structure and all of that is similar to G-Witch. But even like Iron Blood Orphans, which I love, I absolutely think the weakest part of that show, the first like set of episodes are fantastic. I think it's a little shapeless in the middle of that season, and then the second core is like really strong and builds to that tremendous ending. But there's a little bit like once they get out into space that is a little bit circular, and I think has some like plot issues here and there. You know, Gundam Seed and Seed Destiny are both kind of off kilter at the very beginning, and Seed Destiny never snaps together, and Seed very much does snap together, but not in that first core. You know, well, I would say probably the best core of Gundam. Of Gundam Wing is the first core, but that's just because Gundam Wing gets sadder and sadder and worse.
Because that's the only good core of Gundam Wing is just the first one.
Yes, that's the problem.
If Gundam Wing, if the rest of the show had been to that level of quality, you like pray for the Gundam Wing where that was the worst part of the show.
I know, God. Anyway, but no, I do think this is like unusually like really well structured, and structured in a way that I there's no like other Gundam that feels like this one. I think obviously because it's playing with other genres. I think before we got to like episode 10, before we're taken off into space and they have their own ship and stuff, I would have said this is like the most different Gundam since G Gundam. Like this is by far like, and obviously Gundam Build Fighters and Build Divers are on their own thing, but honestly even Gundam Build Divers Re-Rise has more sort of your Gundam basics in it than G-Witch does, until G-Witch brings it all in. And it's exactly what you're saying, Sean. If it's the wolves waiting at the door, it's that growing realization as you're watching the season that at this school, at the academy, they are sheltered from these things, but those things are 100% out there. And these characters have been, in some sense, built to be sheltered from these things. And I think the realization that, like, for instance, something is up with Suletta beyond her being a fun, Tanuki-esque girl. And Lady Prospera, she's not just wearing that mask for fun. There's all sorts of things going on that I think, especially on a second viewing, when you're realizing what's going on, it's really interesting.
Yeah, no, it was, if people have not done the like more binge style watch through of G-Wish, you really should, because I think a lot of that stuff just like snaps into focus so much clearer when you can just move really like seamlessly through those story arcs.
Yeah. Although one thing that is good either way you watch it is I do think that first episode is just a phenomenal premiere. And that is in a long lineage of Gundam shows that have phenomenal premieres, from the very first Gundam 40-some years ago all the way up to now. Gundam premieres are often very good, and I think The Witch and the Bride is up there as well. I was surprised again watching it a second time. There are scenes in that episode I assumed in my memory were like in later episodes, because it moves through so much stuff. It has that Tomino-esque quality of, wow, we got through a lot of plot in 22 minutes here, didn't we? Because you get through all of Suletta arriving, having some initial introductions, meeting Miorine having this kind of chip on her shoulder because Suletta accidentally rescued her, meeting Guel being a dick, preparing for the duel. The duel happens, Miorine goes out in the Gundam first, then Suletta goes out and takes it, there's a fight, and then at the end you have the twist about the whole bride thing, which is the big kind of thing they take from Revolutionary Girl Utena, as you said, Sean. And it just leaves you kind of breathless. It's such a striking, well-done premiere.
Yeah, and it was like immediately right off the bat, you saw like how good this show is at kind of grabbing the audience interest, because that episode is just chock full of great little moments, like with Suletta slapping Guel in the ass to like when he starts harassing Miorine, which is just like an all-time great Gundam moment right at the beginning. You get your slap, but it's like, hey, you got your Gundam slap, but this is not the Gundam slap you've seen before. And her that's where you get like so much of the great physical acting for the characters and the way they do the animation, particularly for Suletta, with like her awkwardness and her like getting to her like attack pose or whatever, in like her defense stance. But then also you get that amazing ending of the episode where she beats Guel in the duel, and she cuts off the crest or whatever on his mobile suit, which has all these feathers on it. So these like angelic like dove feathers go like flying through the air, and they're standing there. And that's when Miorine says, that, hey, you're now my groom, because, whoever wins in the duel is going to be my husband. And Suletta says, oh, it's like, but I'm a girl. And then Miorine has this great line where she says, like, oh, katai wa ne, suisei, like, kochi demo zenzen ario. It's like, man, you guys must be really conservative on Mercury. Like, we're totally fine with that shit here. And it's like immediately you get, particularly with Miorine, the writing for her dialogue is so interesting and so good, that her, like almost every single episode, one of her lines of dialogue ended up being trending on Japanese Twitter because of how good the writing is. In that, like, Oka Taiwane is like, which is that kind of like, hey, you're being conservative, like that went trending on Japanese Twitter as soon as the episode finished. And it's like that episode immediately, it gives you everything you want. It gives you your really interesting characters. It gives you this hint of this cool setting with the school and everything. It gives you this really good fight, and then it gives you your Yuri dynamic at the end with your two cute girl protagonists. Like that first episode, as soon as it finished, I was like, yep, this is going to be good. This is going to be a good fucking show.
And the music, the fucking music, because that's where you get the first version of the Witch from Mercury theme. We do not have a full soundtrack yet. That is one of the most frustrating things about watching a new Gundam show, is I can't just go listen to the full soundtrack yet because it's not out. But there is a like 2-track sampler out on Spotify and everything, and it's got the theme of the school, and then it's got the theme that's just called The Witch from Mercury, which plays in both of her first duels with Guel, and then in different ways in other episodes. But it's where you have like the big fucking just like wailing chorus come in, and it's just so fucking hype. And that first fight is one of the best in the entire series, I think. Just seeing the Ariel in action and what it can do, and it is such a good Gundam design. And then I think the color work on the background, as you said, when she takes off the cap and it just flies into like angel feathers, and then the final shot of them on the hand of the Gundam kneeling down, and there's in the moment where they found out this relationship. It's so good.
Yeah, it's just an all-time great pilot episode, and the fact that they were able to get all of that into one episode is like insanely impressive, because even other, great Gundam shows like can't manage that all the time of like getting all of that into one episode. Zeta Gundam couldn't manage to get all of its shit in that first episode, right? It's got basically a 2-part premiere. And so I'm always really impressed when a show can do this and get the whole scope of what the show is and running through a sample of it in one episode. Like, that's really cool.
That's the Gundam touch. That's where, there hasn't been any major tragedy yet, prologue accepted. But this is a Gundam show just on the basis of there's just not very many anime that do that thing of the first episode is that packed and that good. I think in most anime you would just, because it feels, I think to a lot of writers and fans as well, more natural to like, well, we're going to need a full episode to like meet Suletta before we do this crazy duel, right? And they don't. They know that you can then use episode 2 to do a lot of that key character work. You don't have to like do it in a certain prescribed order. Because episode 1 doesn't get through everything you need, but I think it hits all of those beats to really get you on board and have sort of the stakes established. And then, as you say, episodes 2 and 3 start establishing this structure, Sean, where you have kind of a setup and a payoff episode. But that setup episode is very key in having Miorine start to return the trust that Suletta has placed in her. And go deeper with those characters and have kind of a breather episode. It's extremely well structured, as we've been saying.
Yeah, and one of the key things for that episode 1 and why I think they needed to do it that way is because I think you need to see both sides of Suletta's character, because it's so fundamental to her, right? Because there's one other thing that, like, I think it doesn't stand out to us now that much, but it is obviously still worth mentioning, is that Suletta is the first female protagonist that Gundam has ever had, right? And so... Yes. It's, it's a thing that the show needs to think about, like, how do you portray this character? And I like in that first episode that you get both her, like, social awkwardness and that very kind of endearing quality she has as this kind of bumpkin from Mercury, has never been to a school before. She's never met anyone her age before, I think is the implication. Like, because there are no kids in Mercury. It is like this weird mining facility or something on that planet where they're mining that permit shit that makes the mobile suits work. So she's got that quality to her, this awkward bumpkin. But then when she gets into Ariel, she's like shockingly confident, right? And this is also where you get her kind of catchphrase, the Nigaba Hitotsu Susumeba Futatsu. If you retreat, you get 1. If you advance, you get 2. And you get this like side to her that's honestly unusual for Gundam protagonists at the beginning of a show, where she's so confident in herself and she's so like direct, and that contrast with how scared she is in the first part of the episode gives you this sense of like, there's a lot more to this character. I think when you see her for the first half of the episode, it's very easy to kind of pigeonhole Suletta as like that type, the socially awkward type that you see in lots of anime these days. That kind of is meant to be a little bit of a stand-in for your otaku. Like another show that aired that's a great show in the same season, Bocchi the Rock, is like the epitome of that kind of protagonist for a comedy show. So it like works that they don't really kind of push Bocchi that much outside that, other than towards the end when she gets a bit more confident. But for Suletta, she needs to be both that and also the pilot of the Gundam. So she needs to have this part of her that when she gets into the fight and when she's with Ariel, there's this almost kind of eerie way that she like switches into this pilot mode, and that she's so fearless. And you see that throughout the rest of the show as well. Like when she starts talking to Guel in episode 3 and stuff like that, when she's getting challenged for a duel again, how confident she is in saying like, no, you lost, like I won. She's, when it comes to stuff like that, and it comes to Ariel, and it comes to like mobile suits and piloting, she's not cowed. She doesn't back down. She stands up straight. Her design is so good, where she's like really tall. She's one of the tallest Gundam protagonists we have. Like, she's not tall in real world terms. She's like 5'7" or something. But for Gundam protagonists, she's taller than Amuro was. Like, she's taller than any of the other female characters in the show, and she's got these like very broad shoulders. And so when she's nervous, she like makes herself physically smaller. But when she's confident, she has this very striking, like more kind of like strong, slim, and like athletic build to her that comes across. And I think that's one of those things that just in that one episode, you get to see that whole scope of that character. And it's what makes her such an interesting protagonist, because she's different than other Gundam protagonists. But you can see like all these elements of her character kind of combining into this unique figure.
It's great. It's reversing the formulation for a lot of Gundam characters where, they're hot shit until they get in the mobile suit, and then they have various difficulties, Camille is extremely confident, and then he gets in the mobile suit, and he's confident because he just stole a fucking mobile suit, but he doesn't, know every control yet. He's stumbling out of the fucking police station in the big black Gundam. That's kind of your what you'll often get. Or Amuro or something. Amuro is a shut-in, but he is fairly confident up to and including the point of getting in the Gundam. And then there's a lot of nervousness in that first fight. It's why it's such a famous scene, is the kind of unsure nature with which he goes after those two Zakus in that first scene. And instead, Suletta is at her absolute most confident in there. And it's interesting, the word confident, because I think that is the right word. But I almost would go to a word like, it's almost more of like a Zen state or a flow state or like a comfort, right? Because when she's in the aerial, it's like a sibling to her or like a parent. She feels very safe. It's very homey. We see her hanging out in the aerial in certain episodes later on, just as like that's where she goes and hangs out this in a similar but very different way to the protagonist of Iron-Blooded Orphans in the second half of the show.
Sure.
But that's because he can only have his legs when he's in the Gundam. But no, but she's often hanging out in there. She talks to it. She doesn't seem to have a sense of danger in this thing. Like, it doesn't seem to occur to her that this is a weapon of war where bad things could happen to her inside it. That's the safe place. She's gonna be okay in there. And even up to like in all of the duels, losing does not seem to be a thing that she can even really conceive of. Like, that's just something that like she is going to win. And that's why like confidence I almost think of as like an active thing that you consider. That's just who Suletta is in those scenes, right? Like, that's her home base. That's her tether is to, in like psychoanalytic terms, is to the aerial, and everything else, the further she gets outside of that radius, is scary and is different and is, is what is actually challenging about the world. And as you say, that is such an interesting type, because Suletta is absolutely adorable and fulfills that sort of it was funny watching this and Bocchi at the same time, because Bocchi the Rock, like, there's actually a lot of similarities between the characterization of her and of Suletta. The difference is Bocchi has her guitar work where she's confident, but it's a different kind of thing than Suletta going and getting in the mobile suit, where you see that like the character is just quite a bit more complicated than the type she's seemingly assigned at first.
Yeah, and they're so kind of good at exploring that throughout the whole season, right? Because you have her big breakdown in episode 4 when she's in the Demi Trainer doing that, like, the landmine thing. And that's, like, partially that's because she's not with the Ariel, right? So she's, like, alone on that test, failing it over and over and over again. And then also at the end of the season, when she does get into what is a like actual life or death fight in a Gundam, she's never scared during that, right? That's like one of the things I think is really shocking about the finale, is that you're expecting the turn to be that Suletta, once she's put into a real fight that is not a duel, that then she loses that confidence in the aerial. That's what I expected the finale to be. That's not it at all. Like, she handily, like, sort of wins that, like, brief encounter there. She's never scared. It doesn't seem to occur to her, or if it does occur to her, she doesn't care that she might die in this, like, real exchange with live fire with an enemy combatant. Then the twist is obviously what happens when she kills someone at the very end of the episode, and that's, like, kind of that turn. But that consistency throughout the whole episode is part of just the whole season is part of the thing that's like really surprising and interesting about her character, is that sense of real power she has within the aerial and the confidence, or that kind of almost, as you're putting, Zen-like state that she has, that is kind of always there when she's with the aerial, which becomes a more kind of almost unsettling as the season goes on, when she should be more nervous and she should be more scared than she is. And now she's like literally talking to Ariel in the cockpit, and other people are taking note of that and being like, what the fuck's going on? It's such a different kind of arc for a Gundam protagonist. I think works so well here.
Yeah. And, you said earlier that we maybe start to take it for granted. And I think I actually noticed it even more on the second viewing. Not only is this our first Gundam show with a female protagonist, it is a predominantly female cast.
Yes.
Like, that is a major part of it. All of the major main characters are women, and you do have a couple of male characters, but they are very clearly either the villains, like in Miorine Rembran or Shadiq, or they are kind of like, it's ambiguous where, we don't know exactly, I think, where Guel is going to fall on which side of the line in future episodes, although that's a very interesting character. But those are very clearly supporting characters. All of our, like, main central figures in this show are women, up to and including the Char of this show is her mom, is Lady Prospera, which is one of the most interesting things they do.
Yeah.
And I think having just a primarily female cast, having a show that is primarily about, relationships between women, having a central, I am not 100% sure where they're going to go with it, but it sure in episode 11 seems like it's being coded as a romance between Miorine and Suletta. All of that I think is like, this is not a case where they just took an existing sort of Gundam template and put a woman in instead of or a girl in instead of a boy. We have a Gundam girl instead of a Gundam boy. They really thought through the whole show around how do you tell a Gundam story with not just a girl, but women at the center of it. And I think that's one of the coolest things about this show. And one of the things that I think has really probably helped it to explode in all sorts of fandom circles that other Gundam shows might not have.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the things that, attracts like a different audience to it, because outside of like the specific like periods where you had Gundam Wing or you had Double O, the shows that like really in Seed, those shows that really appeal to a female audience, generally speaking, Gundam still has a very kind of like masculine like sort of perception of it, because most Gundam stuff is so kind of like masculine oriented and is marketed towards men and stuff like that, and they all feature male protagonists. And like the popularity within the female fan bases around the shows like Gundam Wing and Gundam Seed and Double O Gundam is primarily around a yaoi style fan base that's about male to male pairings that those shows never get explicit about, but they do toy with enough to sort of like entertain that fan base and attract that fan base. Whereas here, it's taking a very different tack in how to attract this bigger fan base that reaches different kinds of demographics, whether in like sort of different otaku spheres with some of the genres it's tackling, or just in terms of like women by featuring female main characters. And as I say, it's not just Suletta, it's the whole main cast, and it's what the core fundamental relationships of the show are primarily focused on. Like the main two relationships in the show are Miorine and Suletta and her mother, Lady Prospera. And it's like, it's so much about the dynamics of those relationships. And like most of the juiciest moments in the series are about when those three characters all intersect together. Anytime that Miorine is in a scene with Lady Prospera, it's like a lightning scene, because you're having the kind of core relationships in the show coalescing in one moment. There's only a couple times it happens over the course of the season, but it shows you where the focus is, and the kind of thematic heart of the character dynamics is all rested in those three characters.
Yeah, and Gundam has had countless great, female characters over the years, from the very first show on to today, and I think Yoshiyuki Tomino's shows are this interesting evolution where, particularly starting with Zeta Gundam, I think the supporting cast becomes predominantly female, up to, like, I think Turn A. Turn A really should be considered a show with two protagonists, because you really do have the one in the mobile suit, and then you have Diana and Soriel and all of that. And so you have those two, and then up to G Recco, where you have your main boy, and then almost everyone of substance around him is a girl, in a lot of, or at least on the ship that he's on. But I think you watch G-Witch and you realize that there is just something very materially different when your point of view, when your mediating force for all those relationships is also a girl, right? And it just does create a different kind of show where, like, something like, Turn A Gundam has probably as many important female characters, but it is still, and if that show, maybe that's a bad show to use because gender is such a complicated thing in that show. But, maybe G Recco is a better one. You do still have your sort of normal teen boy in the middle of it as sort of your mediating force. And that is not the case with G-Witch, and it's something that's cool about it. And, Suletta is just instantly, from episode one of the coolest, best, most interesting, funniest protagonists this show has ever had. And, Gundam has never lacked for great protagonists. There's only a couple of shows where the protagonist is a lesser part of it. Bill Divers and Gundam Wing, basically, right? Even Gundam Seed Destiny. I like Sheen. The problem is the show, not Sheen, right? Sheen is great. The show sucks. The show fails Sheen. But yeah, I fucking love Suletta. Do you want to just dive in on her a little bit more since she is the star of our show?
Sure, yeah. I mean, with her, obviously, you have to give massive credit to Ichinose Kana, who is the voice actress that plays Suletta. She, the first big role she had, and actually it's the first role I've found that she's credited in. I'm sure she probably was in smaller stuff, but stuff that just doesn't get credited in ways that are easy to find. But she played one of the main characters in Darling in the Franxx. She played Ichigo in that show. That show, I think, has a complicated legacy and has some good stuff about it and a lot of bad stuff about it. Darling in the Franxx. A show I don't think we'll ever cover on this podcast or on Japanimation Station. But she's good in it. I like Ichigo as a character, and it's a good performance, particularly for was effectively a novice voice actor at the time. And then she's been in quite a few other things since then. She was Tuesday in Carolyn Tuesday. She's Maki, basically the cousin to Kaguya-sama in Kaguya-sama Love is War. That character is mostly in the background for the first 2 seasons, but she gets lots of good stuff in season 3. So it's she's been here or there, but, she's fairly young, and so her main career starts about 5 years ago, because, Darling in the Franxx was in 2018. So this is definitely her biggest role as a main character. I mean, it's hard to get much bigger than the protagonist of a Gundam show.
Right.
And she does such a good job, both as Suletta, obviously the performance is phenomenal, because the character is asked to do a lot. There's a lot of range to her, as we're talking about. If you both have to do the kind of comic stuff and the socially awkward stuff, but you also have to project that kind of confidence and that power when she's piloting the mobile suits and she's in the fights. And she plays the whole breadth of the character so well, but also someone who's been listening to the kind of radio podcast thing they do, the promotional show they do, and seeing some of the YouTube videos they've put out and stuff promoting the show. Obviously, as a protagonist, or the actor playing the protagonist for a show like this, a big part of her job is being that kind of shepherd for the show and advertising it and that kind of public image. And she's so good in that capacity as well. If you listen to the radio show that she's on, or find clips of it that have been translated into English, it's so much fun to listen to her talk about the show, because she clearly loves it so much and loves it as a fan, and the way she can she breaks down scenes and thinks about the character dynamics and stuff like that. It's clear that she has a really sharp eye on the dynamics of how the show and the characters work. And it's my favorite part of listening to those podcast episodes basically every Sunday, which luckily they're still doing. Even when the show is off between the 2 seasons, they're still doing them every Sunday.
That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so she's so good in this role, both as the character and as that kind of public face for the show. She just I think knocks it out of the park for the whole thing that someone like this is asked to shoulder for a show this big.
It's a star-making performance, as I was going to say virtually all Gundam protagonist roles have been, at a certain point, have been big star-making performances, even sometimes for characters we don't like as much, It's incredible, and I think she is tremendous in this, in multiple modes. So much of this is also comic. She is by far the funniest Gundam protagonist. She produces the most laughter. A lot of that is down to the animation, and I think you cannot praise the character animation on Suletta enough for how much performance is in there. And you've talked about that already, Sean, with just how they use sort of her height and how she holds herself and how she moves around spaces. But just in her voice, she has so much fun with the part and inhabiting that character. And when things get more serious, in episode 4, when we sort of see a hopeless side of her for the first time, she is incredible there. I think in the final stretch of episodes where she starts having some major insecurities, there are just some absolute heartbreaking line readings that she has, when she's alone in the 0G bathroom with her drink because she didn't get one of the chicken dinners that were being given out and she's too shy to say anything. No, I suspect that Kana Ichinose will be a major force in voice acting for decades to come, because that's the kind of role that this exposes that, okay, she's the kind of person we are going to see starring in a lot of stuff. This is a tremendous performance.
Yeah, and it's fun for me because I talked about on the weekly stuff segment for this episode that I'm playing the Tsukihime remake visual novel, which has full voice acting. They recast all the characters because, all the old actors from the old animators, that's like 20 years ago. And she plays Hisui, who's one of the main characters in Tsukihime. And when I noticed that, I was like, yes, awesome. I feel like I've been on the Ichino Sekana kick because also she plays a main character, one of the main characters on an anime called Do It Yourself that I've watched about 6 episodes of on Crunchyroll, and that's very good. So yeah, she's just like a great actress, but this performance in particular, it's phenomenal. And just the character is saying, like, there's some of those scenes are so where you see that like the weaker side of her are so effective, and particularly it's for me it's after the whole thing in the bathroom and there's the chase and Miorine like finally gets her, and Suletta has this, and she says like, Suletta, like, come on, like, move forward, just like move forward like an idiot, like an annoying idiot, like you always do, right? It's like if you retreat, you get 1. If you advance, you get 2, right? Come on, like, do it like you always do. And Suletta has this moment where she just says, I can't always do that. The reason why I say it is because it's scary. Every time I try to move forward, it's scary. And so that's why I have to say I can't be like you all the time. And that moment like hit me like a fucking truck because you feel it so much because her character is so relatable like that. Like, I think everybody has had a moment like that moment where she realizes that her lunch isn't there or whatever and is like, I don't want to bother anybody with this. And she feels like kind of like, oh, like I can't be here. She wants to like become invisible. And I think that's the thing that everyone can relate to. But then also when you get that kind of underneath the surface of that confidence, that notion that it's like, I can't just do that all the time. That's she's not a superhero or whatever and can just flip it on and be super confident, that it's her convincing herself to be like that. I think that line and that moment and that scene, you really see the full depth of her as a character and how tragic then it is that like that kind of very human part of her is clearly being kind of stamped down by Lady Prospera and everything that's happening with Suletta as she gets into the fight in episode 12. But there's a real rich humanity to Suletta and so many sides to her and this like really well observed sort of emotional state of that awkwardness and that nervousness and that loneliness that she has, and how deep that goes, like how deep that can like hurt somebody, and how invisible that hurt can be as she has to say like, I can't just do it all the time. It's like that's because it scares the shit out of me.
Yeah, I know the very final scene of this season has gotten maybe a lion's share of attention because of how shocking it is, and it is a brilliant ending and turn. But for my money, easily the best scene on this show so far is the one you're talking about, where they have that chase where Suletta is running away from Miorine rather than talking to her. Miorine grabs one. You've got just tremendous animation. I've never seen 0G animation in this or any other show done that well, where like, I know I shouldn't say weight because you don't have weight in space, but like the mass of the characters and their bodies in motion and all of that is so finely considered. And then, culminates in this scene where they are up hugging against this glass, having this conversation. You have Miorine also breaking, because Miorine is also a tremendously confident character in a lot of ways, right? She is a very standoffish character. She has kind of a tsundere archetype in that sense. And then you have this just breakdown of how much of a source of strength Suletta is for her. You have that part where she's just like punching against Suletta's chest to try to say like, you don't understand, I'm doing all these things that I hate because I love you, is like the basic like underpinning of that, because you give me strength. And it is just, I love that Gundam F91, may have failed in life, but in death, it is the most enduring image in the history of Gundam, is just two bodies in space floating, embraced. It's so beautiful. You get it all the time. This is one of the best versions of it in Gundam history. And yeah, just as an exchange between these two characters who I think we've come to love, really clarifying that relationship. Both actors, and we'll talk about Lin in a second, who is also extraordinary in this. It's just, that for me is the height of this show. It's one of the best anime moments from the last year. It's so good.
Yeah, it's amazing. And yeah, and there's everything around that moment and building up to it, because I also love Mr. Cool and Mr. Hot, the keychains that Suletta buys from Miorine, also, which apparently they actually have like merchandised those in Japan, which tells you like how smart the people making this show are either because they knew that would become a funny meme because the audience memed that shit as soon as it happened in episode 10. And so they're like, oh, we're going to have that in the pipe that we are going to actually like make these. Or they were able to turn around so quick to start like to create some sort of deal to actually like make and sell those things fast enough, because it was like a week or two after that episode they started selling them. But it's like the people making this show are very, very smart at making money because it's like all those little moments that like grab your attention, like the little keychains and stuff like that. I think the audience gets so involved in it, and then the show knows how to kind of push forward with those kinds of things and embrace that larger identity that the audience makes for the show.
Absolutely. But with everything we're talking about with Suletta, there's also something up with her. And I think we should talk about this because I'm so curious. I did not catch on my first viewing the math problem of Suletta Mercury, but I caught it on my second viewing, which is that the Vanadis Institute incident, which is the events of the prologue, where Caterra is created, and this is basically where what's the father's name?
Delling.
Delling Rembran basically comes to power and goes and kills everyone at the Vanadis Institute, who are all the people we know. That's where Suletta and her parents are. That's where Suletta's dad dies. All of that. There are, I think, 2 specific occasions, but the one that I noticed is in episode 7, Shelby Gundam, is 21 years ago. And we get that as a hard date. It's 21 years ago. They also are very specific to name Suletta's age, which you don't always actually get in Gundam. You get a sense of how old the character is, but someone saying out loud, I am X number of years old. In the pilot, in the premiere, she says, I'm 17 years old. So we know she is 17. She was 4 years old because it was her birthday. Eric, what are their original last names?
Eric Samaya.
Yeah, Samaya. It is Eri's 4th birthday in the prologue, which means that Eri would be 25 years old in the present. Suletta Mercury is 17. What is going on? And I remember noticing that, and I just made a tweet like, that's an intentional mystery, right? There's not, I was worried for a second, like, am I missing something really simple? Am I wrong about what the Vanadis incident was? Is this some kind of like weird gravity time distortion thing going on here? But no, it is a mystery. The math does not add up. And when you add that to Lady Prospera is fucking up to something and everything else, there are some very dark potential implications going on here, Sean, and I am worried we are going to get some real heartbreak for Miss Suletta Mercury in the episodes to come.
Yeah, because yes, so there is a mystery here about the relationship between Suletta and Eri, the little girl in the prologue, because I think you're meant to expect that they would be the same person, because it's the daughter of, Noria Samaya or whatever her name is, but Lady Prospera. And
it's just the film language of going from the prologue, little red-haired girl voiced by Kana Ichinose, to episode 1, bigger red-haired girl voiced by Kana Ichinose, same mother, all of that. The show wants you to believe that.
Yes, and there's like imagery in the opening and ending themes that obviously like pairs them together and stuff. So it's like the natural assumption would be this is an older version of that character. But there are things like that make it seem like that would have to be impossible. There are lots of fan theories. Like the thing that my guess is, this is my thing that I think that they're going for. I think she's a clone or something like that of the girl from the prologue, Eri, and that Eri is basically Ariel. Because there is also imagery, particularly in the Ellen episode where she defeats Ellen in the duel, where Ellen, there's some sort of new type-esque mind meld type thing happens, and he sees all the bits that the Ariel has as like these sort of spectral children, and hears their voices of them laughing. And we know that Suletta can communicate with the Ariel. She can talk to it. And the Ariel is effectively alive. Like it has thoughts, it can think, and it can communicate, and it can respond to people. And so my guess is that something happened with like when Eri was in the Gundam in the prologue, that her consciousness or whatever is in that machine, and that the Ariel we have is like a modified version of that original Gundam for the prologue. That is my guess. And that effectively the Ariel is Suletta's older sister. Because also there is a lot of very intentionally written dialogue with Lady Prospera where she refers to her daughters or refers to her daughter, and it is not always clear, is she referring to Suletta? Is she referring to Ariel? Is she referring to both of them? And it's very particular how it's written. And then there's also the scene when Suletta's in the Earth dorm. And this is actually a scene where the Crunchyroll subtitles are wrong with how they translated this, where she's having a conversation to the Earth girl who has the Ouija board looking thing or whatever, and she's doing the fortune telling. And she's like fortune telling Suletta's relationships, and she says like, oh, like this represents your mom, and it's clearly a really big presence in your life. Your dad doesn't seem to be here, and Suletta says like, I don't remember my dad. There's a lot of stuff like that where it feels like Suletta would be able to vaguely remember her father. She would be able to vaguely remember the weird girl, the like professor lady, who clearly like Eri and her were really close in the prologue, but Suletta doesn't recognize her when she's the video of her. But then the girl with the fortune telling also says, oh, there's this thing here. Do you have like a sibling or something? The Crunchyroll subtitles translated it as brother, but the word is kyodai, which can specifically mean brother, but in general is a non-gendered term that can just mean sibling. And so and Sled is like, I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know what that's referring to. And to me, like, the implication is, like, I think it's clearly Ariel, whether or not that also means it is the spirit of her older sister / like original, if she's a clone, Eri. That's not necessarily confirms that directly, but clearly, like, the Ariel is effectively a sibling to Suletta. They have been raised as siblings. They are both daughters of Lady Prospera. This is also reinforced by, if you have read the sort of little, like, prequel novel. Like, it's not really a novel. It's like it's like a chapter, basically. But they released this official thing that is called Cradle Planet, and it's translated in English as well. And it just tells like this little kind of snapshot of a story of Suletta before she goes and kind of building up to her going to the academy. But it's all narrated from Ariel's point of view, and Ariel calls Lady Prospera mom. So all of that stuff to me builds up this idea that I think that Ariel is Eri from the prologue, whose soul is tied to this machine in some way. This is yes. Why everyone's afraid of the Gundams. This is why they're called witches. Like, this is the fear. It's not just that it will take the life of the pilots, but that, like, you will ascend your human form, and you will become some sort of conscious being, as all anime eventually leads to. You become some sort of, like, weird conscious transhumanist entity, and that she is tied to this machine.
Yes. So let's put a pin in that for a second and make sure we come back to those transhumanist themes and what's going on with the Gundams, because there's so much interesting stuff going on there, right? But going back to your theory, which I think is the popular fan theory here, and I definitely believe it, because there's so many little pieces in the show that on first blush are just playful. Like, if you have Lady Prospera saying, oh, hello, my sweet daughters, talking about Ariel and Suletta, that doesn't have to mean anything sinister. That can sound just like a playful, I made you because you are my literal flesh and blood daughter, and I made you because I built this mobile suit, you're my daughters, haha, right? That can be a playful thing. The fact that Eri is the first syllable of Ariel is not a coincidence, but can also be a fun little nod if you don't have these other pieces in there. And when you start doing the math and thinking about it and seeing all these other pieces you're seeing, Sean, that's when it starts to come together that, oh no, these are not just playful little things. This is part of a larger plot. And this is where you have to bring in Lady Prospera, because, one, we got our first female Char-clone, right? I don't think we've had another... Exactly. Am I wrong on that?
I don't think so. I think the closest you get is like Lady Kawaguchi from Build Fighters Try is maybe like the closest we get to a female Char-clone.
But that's in the context of there's already been Meijin Kawaguchi, who is a normal Char-clone. Yeah. And I think what is so fascinating about Lady Prospera is that she is at once one of the straightest versions of the Char archetype, in that it is someone who was seriously wronged by the lead villain of the series, has donned an alternate identity and a flamboyant mask, and is now engaged in a very elaborate years-long revenge plot. That is Char to a T. Most Char clones actually don't have those pieces. They mostly are just the mask and a general attitude, but not actually recreating the story. You know, Gundam Wing is the most direct because they just do all of the Char story. But you do get all of that with Lady Prospera. The twist on it is that this is a woman and this is a mother. And then you have to ask yourself, what if Char Aznable had ever had children? And you are horrified to realize, yeah, it would probably look like this, and I would be very scared for those children. Because Char Aznable, the Char type, is fairly narcissistic and doesn't necessarily just love people unconditionally, but uses them. And as nice as Lady Prospera seems on the surface in some scenes, I think Suletta is going to learn some horrible things about her mother.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like Lady Prospera cares a lot more about Ariel than she does Suletta. Like, That's the read I get. Like, that's, I think, one of the reasons why some of that dialogue is so, like, sort of vague when she uses the word daughter. I mean, she definitely specifically refers to Suletta as her daughter unambiguously multiple times. But there are also times where it feels like she's using the word daughter more preferably to refer to Ariel than she is Suletta. When it's the two of them together, it feels like the word daughter is like more associated with Ariel directly in a way that becomes more like heavy as the show goes on. But yeah, I think Lady Prospera is one of those things of the show that like really took me aback. Like I just wasn't expecting, because we know this character from the prologue. And I was not expecting that character to come back as your Char clone. Was like really crazy in episode 2 when Lady Prospera shows up. Although technically she's actually in the background of episode 1, which obviously I couldn't have noticed the first time I watched it, but she's in, right? She's part of like the big like conglomerate or whatever, but the conglomerate that everyone's a part of. So she's like a part of this whole business venture as well. But Lady Prospera is like the most legit Char clone. You know, she really does embody, I think, all of the fundamental elements of that Char character in a way that, you know, as we've noted throughout most of our Weekly Suit Gundam stuff, like most of those Char clones just don't do it. Or if they try to do it, it's, as you said, it's like Gundam Wing, and they're just copying literally the plot points directly, but are missing the whole kind of fundamental point of the character. And Lady Prospera, every scene she's in, it's just like fucking ice runs down your spine, because you both like see why Suletta idolizes her the way that she does, and also how scary that is, and also like how kind of unfathomable what Lady Prospera is trying to do is. Like, she's clearly not even just straightforwardly trying to get vengeance on Delling, because there's that scene in episode 10 or 11 where she's meeting with him, and there's some sort of project called Quiet Zero that they are both working on, and he knows who Lady Prospera is. So it's like, what the fuck is Lady Prospera's deal is a thing that this show, I think, has so far managed incredibly well to like build up the suspense of not seeing where is this character going? Like, what is she actually trying to do is a thing we really have kind of no idea about yet.
Yeah, and I would say, if we're going into theorizing, it sure seems to me like the big bad of this show is Lady Prospera, not Delling Rembran. Because one of the things that, and this was very much a, you know, first viewing versus second viewing thing for me. Yeah. Where on the first viewing, I mean, Delling checks every box of your normal dickhead Gundam villain, right? He is an old man with a deep voice who runs an evil company, who kills people, blah, blah, blah. But you actually see he and Miorine have a more complicated relationship than I think you assume at first, where she is so angry at this guy. She so wants to throw off those reins. He is so cold and distant from her. But I think, you know, in episodes like Shall We Gundam, in some of the final episodes where she is then, you know, working with him for Gundam Inc., you start to see he is quiet and he is distant, but he is not necessarily cruel to her. Like, he does, I think he expects big things of her, and he could clearly be a much, much, much better father. But when she has this pitch for the Gundam thing, and when she goes up to him and she has the correct read of, I know what will get these people on board with my company, and I know what I have to do, and I know what the thing holding me back is, which is my pride. You suddenly realize that is not a Delling Rembrandt problem in that moment. That is Miorine's own hangups, which when she sheds them, he immediately gives her what she needs and then is working with her in subsequent episodes. And the finale involves him being targeted for assassination, almost dying, and her saving his life. And that to me reads as, that is meant to be a much more complicated relationship than it looks like at first blush. I don't necessarily think Delling is a good guy, but I think there's much more there. And because we don't fully know the nature of the Gundams, it is still entirely possible that he has more of a moral high ground on these things than we are aware of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it seems very cold and calculating. I think there's even a version where you could read it as, this guy doesn't actually care about stopping the Gundams. He cares about owning them, because that is clearly the goal of other people in the Benerit group. But his motivations are still fairly unclear because he is quiet and distant. And so you have that. And then over here you have Lady Prospera, who is on the surface much warmer to her daughter. Suletta has a much closer relationship. Is her whole catchphrase of advance or retreat gain 1, advance gain 2 comes from her mom. She idolizes her mom. Clearly much warmer, but as you go along, her Lady Prospera's motivations become much, much more unclear, and her entire affect seems cold and distant and wrong. I think the big wrench in the works there is during the Shall We Gundam episode, where one, Lady Prospera is just out of the room while Suletta is being grilled on whether or not this thing is a Gundam. All of that goes down. Lady Prospera comes back in, and Suletta's like, but Mom, is it a Gundam? Is it not? Why did you never tell me? She's like, oh yeah, of course it's a Gundam. And just lied to her daughter this entire time, never gives an explanation, never gives an apology. And then, of course, you get one of, I think, maybe the legitimately most chilling moments in Gundam history, which is in the finale, when she basically gives her daughter a motivational speech on the positive value of murder, which is crazy. It's like, it's a version of a speech we've heard in other shows, not just Gundam shows, of like, you have to fight because if you don't fight, the people you love could be hurt. But it is so clearly not a sincere version of that speech. It is not a like actual, because does Lady Prospera give a fucking shit about Miorine? Probably not. And instead it feels very, very manipulative of, hey kid, you're ignoring your programming. Get back in the robot. It's much closer to like Shinji and his dad than, in Evangelion or something, than I think what you would expect at the beginning. And it's one of the things I'm most interested in for the rest of this show, because it is so playing with Gundam types and anime types in such an interesting fashion, as much of this show is. But I love that at the end of this season, it's so unsettled where we're even kind of looking at for the antagonistic force.
Yeah, like really, Lady Prospera does feel like what if Gendo was good at dealing with Shinji rather than like an idiot. Like Gendo is so bad at getting what he needs or wants from his son. And Gendo is definitely like in actuality a lot closer to Delling Rembran, right, in terms of like their actual characterization, if not necessarily their role in the structure of the show. But Lady Prospera is so good at getting Suletta to feel or believe what Lady Prospera needs her to be able to like override whatever fears or misgivings that Suletta might have, to the point where she like happily splats a dude at the end of the show. And yeah, there is something very almost like satanic about the character in that way, that she is pulling Suletta deeper and deeper into this darkness, while all the while being framed angelically. And that's one of the things that's powerful about that scene, is that one, it is straight up playing like an inspirational instrumental version of Shikufuku, the opening theme song, which is like anime shorthand for, this is like the powerful speech that like you need in order to overcome your issues as a protagonist. And is being given in a scene that is also coded very visually directly of, Suletta is stepping over the boundary of a doorway into blood. Like there's the blood spurt that is on the ground, and she's stepping onto it as she crosses that threshold. So it's like, musically and like in terms of the way that Lady Prospera is framed in the scene, it's supposed to be so inspirational, but all the context of the writing and some of those other shots with the blood and everything juxtapose it in this way that is really unsettling. And all through this, you have this incredible vocal performance by Mamiko Noto, who we have heard recently, though this podcast is not out yet, but she is Asagami Fujino in the Kata no Kyokai series. The girl with the twisty powers, let's call her. And Mamiko Noto's in like a million things. We'll eventually hit one of her big roles in Clannad when we do our KyoAni stuff. She is the Hell Girl from Hell Girl, Jigoku Shoujo. She's in a million things. She's just like a great voice actress. She's also in Tsukihime. So I've been hearing a lot of both mother and daughter in that visual novel. But the performance she gives as Lady Prospera, the like unflappable nature of that character and the like icy, super controlled way that she uses her voice, that even when she's saying something pleasant, it just gets under your fucking skin. And particularly that scene in Shall We Gundam where she's talking to Miorine and she's like just poking her with these little barbs about like her pride and all this. And she starts laughing at her, saying like, oh, like, you know, you're saying all this shit about your dad. But then when I look at your beautiful clothes and I look at this like special room you get to live on in the academy and this and that and the other thing, I just think how silly, how strange it all is. She just uses the word okashi in Japanese. And it's just, she's very technically polite with everything that she's saying. But the really pointed way she's saying it is like, it's like legitimately just like upsetting to hear. And I think that is probably, honestly, my favorite vocal performance in the whole show is Mamiko Noto as Lady Prospera, because it's like, she's a very veteran voice actress, and it just feels like she's bringing everything she has to bear for this incredibly juicy, really layered, very scary villain character that is very reminiscent of characters we've seen before with Char, but this is another one where we're flipping the gender of the character and making Char a female character, as you also said, like making her a mother. Like that really changes the context of Char. And like having, because there's definitely a sort of a woman in a man's world aspect to the Lady Prospera character that adds this very different dynamic to why she is scary and why she is as intimidating as she is.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I'm just looking through, I have a set of screenshots just from these last couple episodes that I'm looking through just to have some of the dialogue and have some inspiration as we're talking. And that scene where she gives the inspirational murder speech, the framing in it is just so good. And you already talked about this a little bit, but you have basically 3 or 4 major shot setups in this scene. You have, you know, on Lady Prospera herself from Suletta's point of view, where you are low to the ground looking up at her. You have Prospera looking down at Suletta. You have this side shot that I think is very striking of Suletta is sitting in this dark doorway behind the sort of door line. You know, Prospera is standing up straight outside of that door line. The door line itself is covered in blood. And so you have this very clear division where Prospera is standing like literally in the light. There are big, you know, LED panels above her. It's a shining light on her. Suletta is sort of sitting in darkness alone. She's huddled. You know, Lady Prospera is tall and is open. And at certain points she kneels down and is very close with her daughter. You have the sort of dynamic shot near the end of Suletta, I know you're ready to move forward, and offering out her hand like an angel. And then there is that just killer, quietly one of the smartest and most chilling shots in the history of Gundam, I think, of Suletta taking the step. One foot is out sort of in the darkness of the space she had been in. One foot is now stepping down onto the big blood splatter as she says the line, I have moved forward. You know, that is the kind of stuff that it's so interesting. They're using all these pieces of film language to give you sort of mixed signals, right? To tell you the inspirational version of this and the, oh my God, no, Suletta, stay in the closet. This is bad. Don't go out there. Your mom does not have your best interests at heart. Look at that mask. I think that mask operates the same way as Char's mask does at a certain point, where it is no longer there to protect the identity. It is there because it projects a certain inscrutability that is to their advantage. It's so good. It's such interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And there's a few other points I really want to hit with Lady Prospera. One is there are layered throughout the whole show, and Lady Prospera is the most direct one. There are multiple references to the Shakespeare play The Tempest, who's the main character of the Tempest is a guy named Prospero, who is a magician who is sort of marooned on this island, who used to be, I think he was a duke in like Milan or something like that, and he was betrayed and he ended up marooned on this island. He has his daughter Miranda there. And then the target of his vengeance also ends up marooned on that island, partially because I believe Prospero uses a spell to like cause their ship to shipwreck on the island as well. And then ultimately, the target of his vengeance, the guy who ousted him in Milan, that guy's son and his daughter Miranda, they fall in love and get married. And at the end of the play, that is like avoids the potential tragedy where Prospero gives up on his vengeance because he cares more about his daughter's love and all that kind of stuff. And then there's like other stuff that goes on in the plot, but that's like the basic broad plot. And so Lady Prospera, early on in the season, it was very easy to match her onto Prospero very directly, because Prospero he's an interesting character, because I think he is portrayed directly in the play, or it feels like the text portrays him ultimately as being meant to be a heroic character, but you're kind of uncomfortable with him being portrayed as a heroic character in many ways. And I think like Lady Prospera gets that, and there's early on you're kind of on her side in that way, but then they push her really far by the time you get to the end of the season to this like terrifying villain territory, where it now feels like, you know, that she is kind of off the rails of that projected plot of the Tempest, that like I don't see any version of this story where Lady Prospera is like giving up on whatever her goal is. I don't even know if her goal is revenge anymore, is how like sort of terrifying she is. Some of the other references to the Tempest are like Ariel. So Ariel in the Tempest is a fairy or like a sprite that Prospero uses, that lived on the island, and Prospero effectively enslaves Ariel. It's one of the things that makes him like feel like, I don't think you could read him totally as a hero character, because he enslaves this magical being, and makes it do magic for him. That obviously Ariel is then the same name as the Gundam in here. One of the major things, though, that's interesting to me, that there are these like very clear, very specific references to the Tempest. But the most famous part of the Tempest is Caliban, who is the monster that lives on the island, and his mother Sycorax, who is a witch, who is dead by the time the play starts, but her like sort of spirit more or less overhangs the whole play. And there's no direct references to Caliban or Sycorax yet, and I'm very curious to see like how, if they're going to go deeper with this Tempest stuff. There are also other Shakespeare references. They reference Romeo and Juliet in probably my favorite piece of dialogue in the show we'll get to. There's also like a character who is referred to as, his name is like Hamlet or something. So it's like there are some other Shakespeare references in there, but they're going pretty deep with some Tempest stuff. And I'm really curious if we're going to get like a dope-ass mobile armor named Sycorax or something. Like where are they going to go? How is Caliban going to show up? Is Guel going to be Caliban? Is kind of one of my pet theories, is that he's going to be ultimately paired off with that character. But that's one of those things where, being an English major, that when Lady Prospera showed up, my eyebrows perked up, because it's the thing, they're like, they're doing a Tempest thing, and you get deeper, like, yeah, they're definitely doing some Tempest shit. But the jury is out on like how far that's going to go, past that kind of setup stuff.
I wouldn't be surprised if they go deeper with it. There's a lot of interesting stuff here, and I do have to say, just Tempest is not a Shakespeare play I have been super familiar with formerly, but just looking at the Wikipedia page and all of the names, this is just a great list of names for mobile suits. That's all I can say about that. There's a lot of characters there you could make some sick-ass mobile suits out of, and I like this idea quite a bit. Let's talk about, for a second, we'll get back to some of the other characters in a minute here, but while we're kind of on this broad set of topics, the whole notion of the Gundams in this show, and kind of the transhumanist qualities here of, this is established for us in the prologue, and we talked about it a little there, but this is a world where we have effectively, like, I guess it's a little unclear to me whether there are governments at all, but basically there's just, the world seems to be ruled by different sort of groups of corporations, right? Who invent various kinds of, which, because these corporations are inventing various kinds of mobile suits and weapons and stuff, seems to me to imply there's quite a bit of war going out there that we are not privy to yet, right? Yeah. And there are probably other conflicts we'll be introduced to at some point. But the Gundams, at the time of the prologue with the whole Vanadis Institute, had been a thing for medical research, for prosthetics. We know, Lady Prospera has her prosthetic arm. That is a piece of Gundam research. And then we have the Gundams themselves start to be made. They destroy the minds of the pilots and take their lives. And this is at the very least, pretext that Delling Rembrandt uses to come in, take over the Benerit group. He had previously been a military commander, and he takes over the corporation and creates Cathedra and decides, as he says at the end of the prologue, we will deny all Gundams. And we're going to put a prohibition on that, no more of that technology. When we get to the actual timeline of Witch from Mercury 21 years later, Gundams are very forbidden. But, of course, you have a bunch of the different corporations we learn over the course of the season are experimenting with it on their own, including the one Ellen Karras comes from. And then we have the Ariel itself. And eventually we have Gundarm Inc., which is the organization Miorine and all her Earth friends and Suletta make together to try to bring that technology sort of back to its medical basis. But there's a lot of questions opened by all of this, including, I think after these first 12 episodes plus the prologue, it is unclear, I think, what the show wants us to think about this technology. Whether, it is actually a positive thing that figures like Delling are trying to bend towards their own devices, and that is why they are using violence for this, or whether there is something deeply wrong going on here, which might point to whatever the hell has happened to Aerie and all of that stuff. And Delling maybe is not as bad as we think, and it's something I'm very interested in and curious about. Is that a decent summary of all of this?
Yeah, because we also know, partially through some of the Ellen stuff, that we have this show's version of cyber new types, right? We have these people who are modified to try to pilot these Gundams better than a normal person could do, but clearly it still causes them phenomenal pain. Like we see that with Ellen, and then we have the two witches from Earth in the last 3 episodes, that they also clearly are some kind of modified person that is meant to be able to withstand these higher permit scores, which the permit scores, from what I understand, just mean how closely connected they are to the mobile suit. And permit seems to be some sort of mineral or something that is mined and used in the production of these mobile suits that allows the operation of the mobile suit. And that, when they get the higher permit scores, they have these weird glowing lines through their bodies and all that kind of stuff. And Suletta seems to be immune to it. She never is portrayed with her physical body having any of those glowing lines on it. Obviously, she's only ever piloting Ariel, so Ariel might be a piece of it as well. Ellen notices there's something unusual or special about Ariel when he tries to pilot it, that it doesn't feel like it's the dagger reaching into his brain that he kind of describes the normal Gundam feeling. And that, you have this notion that, these higher permit scores, we learn in the finale episode that if you're permit score 4 or higher or whatever it is, that antidote thing that disabled the Gundams in the prologue doesn't work on you. So there's clearly this kind of underground arms race around the Gundams and using them as these weapons and creating people that can pilot them more effectively to overcome the countermeasures that Cathedra originally put in place in the prologue. So yeah, I think there is this intentional tension at the heart of the show about the potential of whatever this technology is and who's using it and why they're trying to use it. What are the goals of Lady Prospera? You've got the woman who's part of the Pale Company who did all the Ellen stuff that used to be part of the Vanadis Institute that starts helping Suletta and everyone at the Gundam Incorporation. And she clearly wants to get back to that medical application of it. But yeah, it is definitely one of those things that's really fascinating about the show, is that I think you are far less settled at the end of this season than you were coming out of the prologue about whether or not the Gundams are good. At the end of the prologue, I think I felt like I looked at Delling and it was oh, this guy's a monster, because he doesn't see all the things that these Gundams can do, and he's using this as a way to try to wrest power for himself as a part of this bigger corporation. Whereas now it's definitely less sure. He has that line to Miorine when she asks him to fund her company, where he tells her the weight of the curse of the Gundam is heavier than you think. And there's a lot in that line that I feel we don't really know the full context of what he means by that yet. And it is a thing I'm curious to see how they develop this going forward. What is some of the other side probably of the history of this technology? What is Delling's relationship to it? what is Shoddyck's father's relationship, that he's the guy who's like most opposed, and he's like so anti-Gundam, and he's shocked when Delling is like allowing this research to continue. Like, what is that dude's whole deal? Like, there's a lot about that side of the show that we don't yet know, that feels like the show is setting up a bigger kind of either flashback arc or something that is about our characters starting to learn more about the past, because so far that is one of the big things they don't know, is the real history of everything that's kind of influencing the world that they live in right now.
Yeah, this is part of why this so much feels like the first quarter of this show, not the first half, is because I feel like at some point we're going to need the flashback arc, and that alone could take up a number of episodes, because there's a very complicated web of an older generation of characters going on here. But yeah, the whole thing with Delling is that he does seem to have an actual principled like stance on the Gundam stuff. And it does not necessarily, because of what he allows Miorine to do, I don't know if it's principled in the sense of the technology itself cannot be used under any circumstances, or if he just knows where it can go wrong and that's horrifying. It's also worth saying that over the course of the season, Delling is targeted by several groups, and they seem to be much shittier people than he is, right? Like, the Jaturk family are fucking weasels, and we see him, like, trying to, like, weed them out early on, and part of why Guel has, like, the pressure he has on him is because I feel like Delling kind of has that family's number and is trying to move against them, and they keep trying to kill him, you know?
Yeah.
And there's interesting stuff going on there. There's all this stuff with Shoddyck, who is an absolute schemer, and his whole family. So it's all very unsettled, as you say. But the Gundam, I'm very curious where this is all going, because this is very much still in progress, but I like the ideas here. It's a refashioning of ideas, obviously, that are there in Gundam from the beginning. You know, Tomino in the early Gundams never really does the thing where the machine itself, like, has some kind of psychic link. The people themselves have their own kind of psychic energy in the new type stuff. But obviously, once you get into 90s and 2000s Gundams, you get more of that. This is sort of like a much less grungy version of what Iron-Blooded Orphans did, where Iron-Blooded Orphans makes it literal, like, fucking, links that are put in your back, and there's actual surgery, and it's a little different than the more sort of like, I don't know, psychic cyber new type kind of stuff. But it's very interesting, and yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really fascinating part of the show that is one of, like, the main things I'm interested in seeing how it develops in the next season.
Yeah. All right. But getting back on track, we started our conversation about Suletta so long ago on this podcast, Sean, and somehow we haven't come back around and talked about her bride, Miss Miorine Rembran, who is also a wonderful part of this show.
Yes, so she's voiced by Lynn, who is in also, like, a lot of stuff. I think her big role is, she played I haven't actually seen this movie. I really need to get around to watching it. It's supposed to be very good, but I Want to Eat Your Pancreas, the funniest title of a movie ever, but it's supposed to be really good. She is the main character in that show, and then she's in quite a few other things that I've seen, right? She's also the teacher in Bokuben, which is a pretty decent modern rom-com. But yes, her role is Miorine. She knocks it out of the park. She's the other person. If people want to listen to that official podcast, they do. She's the other. It's her and Ichino Sakana in all the episodes, and she's really good and funny there as well. And Miorine is, she's definitely our, like, resident tsundere character, but not in, like, a dismissive way, in a way that, like, she really uses that character archetype so well, and, like, a lot better than a lot of tsundere characters do. Like, there's so much to her that you see, and, like, it all goes back to that episode 11 scene that we were talking about, of her, desperately trying to flee and escape to Earth, and then her getting kind of tied down at the school through this relationship with Suletta, where she slowly, I think, finds in her relationship with Suletta the things that she wanted by fleeing to Earth. Like, we still don't really know why specifically she wants to go to Earth. Like, it's not just she wants to run away, that she wants to go to Earth. And that's, like, a thing that is so specific that Delling, in a line of dialogue, says that specifically. That he references, like, when they lose sight of her, or, like, her guard loses sight of Miorine, he's like, oh, well, I know she's just going to try to go to Earth. Like, we can get her eventually anyways. So it's like, there's something specific there that we don't yet know. I'm guessing it probably has something to do with her mom. But instead of just trying to run away, her relationship with Suletta slowly gives her this sort of, like, home at this school, and then this company, as she slowly starts finding this confidence in herself, that is that relationship where like Miorine and Suletta are opposites, right? Miorine on the outside is so confident and so like brash and just so outspoken, but inside she's clearly very like kind of brittle and fragile because her whole life she's been thrown around by her father, willy-nilly, like having her groom be decided by these duels and all this shit that she has had no say in. And that's been her whole life, and she's never been able to do anything about it. Whereas Suletta externally seems to lack confidence. She doesn't know how to talk to people. She's nervous whenever she's around people she doesn't know. But like when shit gets real and like push comes to shove and like it comes time for her to act, Suletta's able to summon up that courage and has this like bedrock of something in her that allows her to advance forward that Miorine lacks. And so that's one of the things why that character pairing, I think, works so well, is that they're those reflections of each other. And in episode 11, you see that, and they're both able to kind of fill the gaps that the other person has, because that's also where Miorine's insecurities come out. And she has that great moment where she starts saying, you know, like, always be by my side, like never leave me, and you know, water my tomatoes like 2 times a day, and make sure it's on the Andes setting, and you know, send me 3 emails every day. It's like she just starts writing through. It's like, oh, and also clean my room every other day, and all this stuff where she like, you know, it's intentionally written for her to be like this kind of like obnoxious, clingy girlfriend character, and kind of like making a joke with that. But there is something there of, you know, that's so much of who she is, right? She is so brash. She's able to just decide things on a whim and like kind of push it forward. But underneath all of that, she is like so lonely and covers all that up with this exterior she's created.
I think if you look at, you know, the framing of that scene, I think for a lot of viewers, myself included, that might be the moment you first really realize that Suletta is quite a bit taller than Miorine. Mm-hmm. Like, there's plenty of other scenes where you could see that, but there's something about that moment where Miorine has her head like buried in Suletta's chest and is hugging her, and Suletta is taking on what, in this image that is famous in Gundam of the 2 people floating in midair, is the more masculine side of the you know, 2 people, and she is just, you realize, oh, she's quite a bit taller than Miorine. Mm-hmm. And you know, what you kind of see there is sort of, she does have that ability to give Miorine that like comfort and security that she really does kind of want. She wants someone she can rely on because she's never felt like she could rely on anybody. And Suletta wants to be relied on, you know, is her insecurity in those closing episodes. And yeah, it's a beautiful relationship. There's so much cool stuff there. Lynn's performance in that scene of, you know, the first request is stay by my side forever. And then it is, and don't ever lose a duel, and give the tomatoes more compost, and use the Andes model, and clean my room twice a week, and email me 3 times a day. And I just love how she keeps, like, it becomes more and more childish as she says it. The animation on Suletta's face as she realizes this crazy list of tasks.
Yeah.
It's adorable, it's warm, it's wonderful, and also possibly tragic given what happens in the finale. I love it.
Yeah, she's an amazing character, and Miorine also gets all the best lines. Her dialogue is so good, and she's the character that always gets lines that trend on Twitter. She has the Oka Taiwane line in episode 1. She has, like, one of the big ones is in episode 2. She says she calls her dad Dabusta Kuso Oyaji, which is like you like Dabusta is double standard, but it's like you hypocritical piece of shit dad. Kuso means shit literally, and that word went trending very quickly. Dabusta Kuso Oyaji. It's very fun to say. That's one where I don't think they fully anticipated in time how popular that line was going to be, because Lady Prospera quotes it to Miorine later on, but she doesn't use the exact line. I feel like because she said something like Kusoyaji, but she doesn't put the Dabusta in there. It's like if they had known before they got into that episode, if they had seen the full reaction, I bet they would have rewritten it.
Have they put it on a mug yet? Like, instead of a world's greatest dad mug, you have the Dabusta Kuso Oji mug?
Oh my god! If I was ever become a father, I'm going to get one of those.
Sean, if you ever become a dad, I will promise I will get you one of those. All right?
A hypocritical piece of shit father. It's so good. But my favorite line, Miorine's best line, just because like it's such a genius use of Japanese, is in the episode where Suletta goes on the date with Ellen. And without Miorine knowing, and she runs in, she yells out this line where she says, "Nomi Juri tara yurusanai kara ne," which means like, if you Romeo and Juliet on me, I will never forgive you, or I won't let you get away with that. But the way she says it in Japanese is so funny, because she uses this weird, they like have made up this word where they contracted Romeo and Juliet to Nomi Judy, which you would do for, if you're referring to the play, you don't want to give it the full title. But instead of using the Japanese, like, sort of handy verb of suru, to do, and it's like, if you do a Romeo and Juliet, is normally, I think, how you'd say that line, Nomi Judy shitara, yurusanai kara ne, like, if you do a Romeo and Juliet, I won't forgive you. Instead, Miorine, like, turns to Romeo and Juliet. She just makes that a verb. And so there's, like, she conjugates it as a verb. And there's, like, an implied verb of, like, Nomi Judy do to Romeo and Juliet that's there, that she conjugates into Nomi Judy tada. And it's so funny. And as soon as you hear it, like, it's just such a sharp piece of writing in Japanese that, again, that, like, immediately went trending in Japanese Twitter because it's so funny. It's such, like, a creative use of language, and it just, like, kind of comes out of nowhere, but it's great. And just Miorine has that. Like, every single episode, she's got a scene like that where she gets this really sharp one-liner, or she gets this good gag, like the, like, you know, call me 3 times a day and all that stuff. It's just, you know, the writers for the show, just when you get a Miorine line, you know it's going to be a fucking banger basically every time.
It's so good. And, you know, season 2, they'll have had time to hear the fan feedback. So who knows what kind of one-liners she's going to get next time. Oh, it's so good. Yeah. And, you know, I think also her performance in the final scene that, you know, we're still kind of dancing around. But when Suletta squishes that dude like a tomato, and she basically has 2 words to Suletta, which is this, you know, or 2 phrases, you know, like, how could you do that? And then calling her Hitogurashi, murderer. And just like the abject fear, the animation does this as well, but the abject fear that she instills in her voice, like, making the character sound alien to us because of what she's seeing is chilling. It's one of the things that sells that scene. So, I mean, every aspect of that scene sells that scene. It's a perfect scene, but definitely one of them. Yeah, absolutely. And then also her character design is just amazing. We already talked about the height difference, which is genius. Like, all the character design of the show is genius, but her, like, crazy hair with this weird, like, sort of coif that's, like, she has this very, like, kind of bird-like appearance to me with, like weird hair. And, yeah, she's got a kind of almost like a Napoleon complex style character thing going on, because she is quite a bit shorter. Not just shorter than Suletta, she's shorter than most of the other characters. I think the only character that's, like, the same height basically as Miorine is ChuChu, but ChuChu, like, projects about 6 inches above her head anyways, so she appears to be the biggest character in every scene because 6 inches is low ball in that one, Sean. I looked at that several times. ChuChu's fucking buns are quite a bit bigger than her head. Each of them individually is quite a bit bigger than her head. We'll talk about ChuChu in a second because she's great. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, broadly, there's sort of 2 types of this is very broad, anime character designs. Ones that have normal human colored hair and ones that have crazy colored hair. And I think Gundam has done both at various times. And this is one of the best examples I have ever seen of, we're going to go for crazy colored hair. And everyone has cool, colorful hair that says something about themselves. But, like, it all feels so natural. Like, you never think watching the show that, oh, this is a show with crazy hair colors. It's like, it so fits into, I think, the entire palette that the show uses throughout all of the mobile suits and backgrounds and everything. I think the way the hair is not just colored, but styled. You're talking about with Miorine, it's long. She has that kind of poof in it. ChuChu obviously has the craziest hair in Gundam history. It's so cool. I love all the stuff they do with hair on this show.
Yeah, and in particular, when you have that just amazing piece of animation in episode 11, when Miorine, like, is trying to hold the door open or whatever, as Suletta's trying to, like, shut it, and then Miorine gets slammed back against the wall, and then she has this shot where, like, she, like, puts her hands into, like, claw shapes, and just, like, and she has this, like, grimace, and the way her hair shapes all that, like, everything in that scene and the subsequent chase, this, like, her whole character design really, I think, comes to life when, you know, she gets to run around like that and have these very extreme expressions on her face. And yeah, it's a great character. It's a great character design. It's a great performance. It's fucking incredible writing. I love Mio Mio, as she would hate to be called.
Yes, I love the brief attempt that Suletta makes to give her a nickname, because nickname is one of the things she has on her cute list of things she wants to do at school, which is such an endearing character trait. And so she calls her Mio Mio, and immediately Miorine like throws something at her. Oh, it's fucking great. Also, I don't know how to word this question. How intentional do you think it was that they spend a good deal of the season in Miorine's little vegetable farm, primarily growing tomatoes, and you have many shots of Suletta holding tomatoes and tomatoes getting smashed, and then the final shot of the season is her smashing a dude like a tomato?
Oh, that's completely intentional. Absolutely. No, like there's 100%. It's absolutely intentional. Because there's a lot, like the tomato stuff is great. Like it's an incredible motif occurring throughout the show. You know, you have in episode 1, it's the thing that Suletta and Miorine bond over initially, right? Because it's the thing that Miorine has inherited from her mother, is this tomato garden. And specifically it's this species, or like this, whatever line of tomatoes that her mom developed. And Suletta had never eaten a tomato, and it's just this gorgeous piece of animation where Suletta bites into this tomato and like the juices and all of that stuff. And so that's the thing they bond over. Then later it comes up again in the Shodek episode, where at the end, right, Shodek has this like sort of one-sided crush on Miorine, and he comes to realize by the end of that episode that he was too timid, and he was never able to be the like strong foundation and bedrock in Miorine's life that Suletta was able to be, because he was too scared and he tried to keep too much of a like respectful distance. He was too worried about like stepping into her life. That's like another great episode title, is like, if I could just have taken one more step towards you, is basically what that episode's titled. But at the end of that episode, he's on that threshold to the tomato garden. He can't step into it. And it becomes clear that their relationship is done. Like he has lost whatever chance he had of potentially having this deeper relationship with Miorine that he really wants to have. And she has this unripe tomato in her hand, this like green unripe tomato that she says, basically as Shattuck leaves, "It's too late, you idiot." And she snips it off, and that's the end of the episode. That is also just an incredible use of using the tomato imagery. Then you have all the stuff of Suletta having to try to take care of the tomatoes, and her seeing that as a sign of trust, that then gets betrayed when Miorine hires other people. So yeah, then when the season ends with an image of a human being splatted, but you don't get any viscera, all you get is thick red blood, it is 100% this is the tomato that Suletta has smashed and has potentially ruined, or like might be ruining, her relationship with Miorine. Like absolutely, that is completely intentional symbolism. Like this show is very heavy with how I think it uses a lot of that visual symbolism, with like the blood splats and stuff like that, and Suletta stepping over the threshold, reusing the imagery of holding this hand out that Suletta sees her mother do, and then she does the same thing to Mio at the end of episode 12. Like it uses that recurring imagery and symbolism and motifs all throughout the show. And I think it's one of like the really big strengths of the show, is it's got such a strong command of its visual imagery that it's able to use that so tactically to make these really strong points at various points throughout the show.
Absolutely, yeah. I was prompted, by the way, to do the tomato question and do a little tomato conversation here, because I made a joke on Twitter that I should just make the key art for this episode Suletta holding out the bloody hand, which it might be. You'll know if you're watching this, and you'll see the art on screen on YouTube. And in response to that, I am getting a nonstop parade of tomato gifs and things. My favorite one being Bright Noah's #1 fan sent me just a gif zooming in on Bob the tomato, thinking, and that made me laugh very hard. So yes, that is why this was prompted.
Yes, but it is also very true. Like that is absolutely that intentional use of tomato-based symbolism. Something you don't see enough of, honestly, these days. We should get more tomatoes used as a symbol in fiction.
I hope the first shot of the next episode of the season 2 premiere is Suletta and Miorine in the cafeteria. Miorine just white, pale, just shocked at what has happened, and it is Suletta pouring ketchup onto a burger just to start the next episode.
Yes.
that might be gilding the lily a little too much. But anyway, the other sort of big set of there's lots of characters to talk about, but the next obvious big set of characters we want to talk about is all the Earth characters in the Earth house that takes in Suletta and Miorine. And of course that means we have to talk about a character who is now at the very fucking minimum in contention for the best Gundam name title. Like, she is on the Mount Rushmore of great Gundam names. Chuatury Panlunch, also known as ChuChu. Chuatury Panlunch, who also has the craziest hair. Like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Worthy hair. Just absolute hair insanity. I do not know how she gets it into the helmet. That really should be a subplot on this show, is how she poofs the hair down into a helmet. Let's talk about ChuChu.
Yeah, have you seen the official piece of art they put out that shows how she puts the thing on?
No, I haven't.
Oh my god, I don't know if I have it on hand. You could probably, if you Google around.
I'm Googling.
It.
I googled ChuChu hair.
So,
I think I see it.
Yeah, it should also, if it's the right one, it should also have an image of ChuChu holding a bat with nails in it. If that's the one you're looking at, ChuChu is the best character in anything ever. I don't think it's too extreme.
I found it.
To say that, you know, she is like, I'm here to, with the good book, Jonathan, and I'm here to talk to you about our Lord and Savior, Chuatury Panlunch, because, yeah, ChuChu is just incredible. In particular, you know, she's in the background of the first 3 episodes, and then you get episode 4, which might be legitimately my favorite episode, which is the one where ChuChu punches the ever-living shit out of that one girl. And as soon as that happened, I'm like, I am in love with this character. Like, every scene that ChuChu is in, it makes me happy. I get a big smile on my face. It's the best piece of character design because she has, she's physically very short. One other thing I like about the character design of the show is they also have like showcased a lot of different body types. So it's like she's not like heavy set, but she's like bigger than a lot of the other girls. And because she's also one of the pilots as well, so she has like kind of a muscular appearance. She's a bit squat, and then she has these 2 giant pink puffballs as hair. That then, in the official art, how she puts the helmet on, and this official art was released like the day after episode 4 came out. So I do not know if they had this on hand or if they got one of the character artists to draw this image after they saw this question trending on Twitter. Regardless, this is like the best example of how good this show is and like the people on it are at like engaging with the fans. They put out this art of her holding this like swim cap looking thing, stretching it out over her 2 giant poofs, and then just the next image, she's just squashed them down. And my favorite part of this image is like the important part of how does that work is just sort of elided, but she just sort of squashes it down somehow with this sort of swim cap looking thing, clasps it at the bottom, and then there you go. It's clasped down. She has her bangs are kind of poking out from the front of this swim cap looking thing. The best part of ChuChu is she is a fucking badass, and she always has the super stern look in her face that is so counter to the like bubblegum cotton candy appearance of the character, which is just like the best fucking like Gap Moe thing ever, is this like adorable bubblegum character that is going to beat the shit out of you. And then in that official image, for no reason whatsoever, completely uncommented on, in the corner, after they've already shown you how she puts it on, they just have this image of her in the pilot suit with like the cap thing on, and she's just got a bat with nails in it for no reason at all, glaring into the camera. And they've put that's an official Twitter. They put that on the official Twitter. This is like one of the artists for the show drew this fucking thing. And as soon as I thought that, it's like they get it. They know these characters so well. Like if that's the image you're going to put out, that's not just fans projecting that attitude onto ChuChu. No, ChuChu is that much of a badass. She will beat the shit out of you. It is the like most realistic punch I have ever seen in an anime, is her clocking that girl in the face on the stairs, and the girl like wavers for a little bit and then she like falls over. Clearly this one punch to the face like fucking concussed her, because that's what it looks like when someone gets a concussion. It's just everything about her character is amazing. And then she's also the most foul-mouthed person in the whole show. She's constantly like yelling, bloody murder about those Spatian, like those shit Spatian motherfuckers. ChuChu she's my favorite character in anything. She's great.
She's awesome. They damn well better use that bat in the actual show at some point. I want to see that actual image drawn. My hope is that this is like fucking layout art they did for an actual scene somewhere in like season 2, where she's walking around the ship with a bat with nails in it, and we find out she's had this the whole time. Oh my god, it's an amazing piece of art. Yeah, she's a wonderful character. Episode 4 is a standout for her, and that whole character introduction and her beating the shit out of that girl, it's great. She's so angry at all the Spatians. We also do get a nice little character development where she has this whole, like, I don't know if it's like literally her family or it's like the group of people she lives with back on Earth, who are all like engineers, and like it almost seems like they've maybe like pooled their money to get her out into space to go to this academy, and like she's much softer talking to them, and like these are her actual people who she does not have to have a temper with. And I'm very excited for whenever we inevitably get to Earth, what that arc will be, where I assume we will go and meet all of ChuChu's people, and that'll be a very fun set of episodes.
Yeah. Because ChuChu's also ended up being like a more important character than I think I would have thought at first. Because, I mean, for the first couple of episodes, the idea of Suletta being part of like the Earth dorm had never even like occurred to me, because she's not from Earth. And so that like twist that, oh, like these Earth characters that we've seen in the background for the first few episodes, they're not just like going to be random supporting characters. They're like, you know, going to be part of the main recurring cast of the show. And that ChuChu is the only pilot, other than now Suletta, in the Earth dorm. So like, and you see that particularly becomes really important in the Shoddyk fight. And so that puts her in this like position of like a much higher level of importance in the overall show than I think I suspected when I first saw the character design or saw the first couple of episodes. I thought, oh, she's this cool character that will pop up a couple of times, but isn't going to be that important. But she's fairly central and pretty major, and like is set up to be a really important character as the show goes on as well. One other thing while I'm thinking about the character design, you have your main ChuChu appearance that we see with like either, you know, her pilot suit, and then she's also got like the big pink hoodie that's like too big on her and stuff. You also do get some stuff in the Earth dorm where you see all the girls in like their sort of loungewear, and ChuChu's is so good because she has these like overalls on, and then she's collected her 2 poofs into one giant poof and has like a big sleeping cap pulled over this one giant poof that's like 5 times the size of her own head. And it's like so good. And just it is one of my favorite parts of the show is how sharp the character design is, and like all the outfits the characters have and stuff like that, because it's true of all of the Earth dorm characters. They all look so unique. They all look so different. They're all different like shapes and sizes and skin colors and stuff and hairstyles. There's just such a range of characters represented that all stand out and have like a lot of personality to them. And it's so impressive to me because it's a big cast of characters. And, you know, ChuChu is to me like the best character design. She's my favorite. But all of them have a really striking, interesting character design in a way that you look at other shows and, you know, like there's a few of the like supporting cast of Iron-Blooded Orphans that have a fairly memorable character design. But most of like the random people in Tekkadan just look like anime characters. You know, it's like they look fine, but they don't have like a really striking appearance. And that's how most anime is. It's like you have your main 5 or 6 characters maybe that have really great character designs that they put a lot of effort into, and then everyone outside that sphere is a bit more generic. Suisei no Majo or Witch From Mercury has no generic looking characters. Even like random girl that exists to be punched in the face by ChuChu, that character also looks cool and interesting and has a very distinct, memorable design. And you remember it because you never see her again, because presumably she has not fucking woken up since she got punched in the face by ChuChu.
Yes. Maybe at some point there will be the ChuChu goes to prison arc and just becomes leader of the prison because, you know, she would do that, obviously.
I'd love to watch an episode where ChuChu shanks someone in prison. Please.
That is the quote from this episode, Sean. I would love to watch an episode where ChuChu shanks someone in prison. But it's very true. She's great. Another favorite ChuChu line, I just have to say, is when they do accept Suletta into their house. She has this just incredibly petty, hilarious line where she's like, all right, we're both first years, but I was here first, so you have to call me Senpai.
Yes. That
whole line is great. Then you have their actual Senpai, Nika Nanaura. Great name. This show definitely inherits the Tomino legacy of great fucking names. And Nika is a really interesting character because she's sort of your like warm, nice house mother almost kind of character there who kind of like takes care of everyone in the house and is the cool senpai character. But then also in the later episodes, you realize she is working with Shadik on something, and they have something over her, but she clearly does not feel good about it. She's a double agent, but she doesn't want to be.
Yeah, she's the go-between between Shadik and this like terrorist cell on Earth that attacks in the last couple of episodes. Although she does not know that attack is going to happen because Shadik takes that call personally, and she's left to wait outside, so she does not know that's just going to go down. Which is a pretty dick move by Shadik because it almost gets her killed, and she you know, and that's one of the parts of the cliffhanger for episode 12 is that Nika is exposed to Martin, the leader of the Earth dorm, who saw her sending that signal or whatever. Nika's a great character. It's that kind of character where you know that there's a lot more under that very gentle surface. And we haven't like seen that much of it. But you know that like there's a lot more going on with her.
Yeah. This is an interesting character. She was voiced by Yume Miyamoto for the first 9 episodes. And Miyamoto is sick. We don't know, exactly what, but her agency put out a statement, is focusing on getting well. And Haruka Shiraishi has taken over the part since episode 10. Unclear if that'll be permanent for the rest of this show. I guess we'll see. They're both good performances. It's felt relatively seamless to me as a vocal replacement goes.
Yeah, and actually, I think the thing that was interesting is that there's a couple of scenes in episode 9, which is the last one that Miyamoto voiced on, where her voice sounds really different, not in a way that it feels like they had secretly recast the role already, but in a way that felt like, probably, whether it's COVID or whatever illness she has, it clearly had made it too difficult for her to play the character, so... It sucks. Like, I hate to see that happen because it always feels really bad because, like, voice actors have to work so hard to get the roles that they get. But it's, if you can't do it, then you got to recast it. Yeah.
So anyway, hope she gets better. But still love the character either way. Also has cool hair. She's a blue-haired girl. And then you have all the other fun characters in the dorm. I do like Martin and the other characters. That's where you've got some of your, like, basically you're only, like, normal dudes in the show who are not scheming and doing horrible things. It's just the boys taking commands from the girls at Earth House. And I like all of those guys. They're fun.
Yes, yeah. With Martin is voiced by Inoki Junya, who's the main character also in Jujutsu Kaisen, which is funny to me.
Yeah, it is a kind of small part for him. Yeah. He's fairly big at this point. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it is, apparently though, one of his key influences was Gurren Lagann, I just learned for the first time. That's fun.
Well, there you go.
Anyway, all right. So what else? Should we talk about the 3 main boys, though, we have at the university of Elan, Shadik, and Guel?
Yes, yeah. So we have our 3 kind of rival boys that we work through with our duels. We can start with Guel. Guel's obviously, he feels like he's the most involved because he's the one you start out with, and then he's got the most delightful subplot going throughout the whole show. That was like another, I think in particular, the Japanese fan base really likes Guel. I know that he's like one of the most popular characters on like character popularity polls. I think both because he's legitimately a good character and also he is a very fun meme character, particularly in that middle stretch of the show because, he starts off as your classic bully piece of shit character that needs to get his ass slapped and then beaten by Suletta, and that happens in episode 1, and then they have that duel again in episode 3 where Guel's like, his dad basically like puts an AI or whatever into the mobile suit, and so Guel is not able to really fight until the very end, and Suletta recognizes, his strength, and that is then when you get your great episode 3 ender where it's the reverse of the episode 1 thing where he now is proposing to Suletta, and you get one of the mini episode endings where Suletta just ends the episode with like a sound effect that, Ysunessa kind of had to do, like, find 1,000 ways to make that noise for each one to be more severe as it goes throughout the season. And then from that point, you get so much great stuff with this character where I think you see very quickly, there's this whole other side to him as a person. That's like, yeah, he is this, like, arrogant bastard who, like, thinks, like, the world should be kind of given to him on a platter from a certain perspective because he is the son of one of the CEOs that runs the company or that runs the school and all that kind of stuff. But also, like, he clearly, like, really, like, believes in what he's doing. He cares about, like, the duels and being honorable about the duels. He obeys the, like, whole thing where he comes in and apologizes to Miorine with this very formal apology, and he's very respectful to the teacher in that scene who's like, "Are you done, Guel?" And he says, "I'm sorry, sensei," or, you know, "You can go about with your lesson, I'm going to go," and all this stuff. And you see that, okay, like, there's this other part to him. Like, he isn't just this sort of, like, generic bully character. There is something much more kind of noble that he also has that his dad maybe doesn't want Guel to have, right? Like, his dad just wants Guel to be the guy, to do whatever the dad says and inherit the company and all this other shit. And Suletta starts to show him another path. And that's what leads to Guel having his camping adventures for the middle section of the show, which is one of the best things. Every time they would cut to him at his tent, and he has like a fucking iPad or some shit, and he's watching the duels and everything. And then eventually he leaves the school, and he becomes Bob, and he ends the show as Bob, and then eventually he murders his own father. And it's like, what a fucking journey. You go from asshole bully to like, oh, maybe there's like more to this guy. It's like, oh, he's camping. Okay, now he's changed his name to Bob, and then now he's committed patricide. It's like it's a big journey you go with him on these 12 episodes.
It is amazing when you think about like how much plot this show is moving through to begin with, and then it does wind up having time for this entire subplot with Guel in the background, which is just this eternal humiliation of this character. Like, he just loses and loses and loses and loses and keeps falling and falling and falling until you think he can't fall anymore, and maybe this is going to be a little bit of a redemption arc for him in this final episode. And instead, what it is that he finally wins a fight, and it's killing his own dad in space. Like, this almost feels like if this were a different AU Gundam show and we didn't already have a Char-clone, Guel would come back in season 2 with a mask and be our Char-clone, right? Yeah. Like, terrible things have happened to him. There's another version where you could see him very much falling in the vein of, like, Jared Mesa in Zeta Gundam. And I don't think he's going to be any of those things. I'm really curious what he will be when we come back, because clearly they've devoted this much time to him. They have a plan. He will be a major figure in the future of this show. But like, what like side of morality will he fall on? What specific role will he play? Because those last couple episodes really threw a loop into any kind of. It could still be a redemption sort of arc in a sense, but boy, that is a Tomino style trauma that has been thrown his way in episode 12, like literally ripped out of the various Tomino shows. That's something that would happen in Victory Gundam. You know, he's gonna come back to the ship with his dad's head in a helmet and go, "This was my dad." You know, it's intense.
It's definitely the most Gundam moment in the show is him going like, "I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I haven't moved towards Suletta Mercury yet." Like, I think that like that line specifically feels like it's written in a Tomino style. I think like that scene, and then he reverses the attack or whatever, and then kills his own dad. Realizes, hears it over the radio. That's where, you know, his dad gets like the one like minor redeeming thing you hear about him is he's like, "I searched for you, son." It's like, okay, well, at least, you know, we know he cares enough about his son, at least as a tool, to not be distraught when Guel just like disappeared. But you know, Guel's dad is definitely the most like objectively, he's the worst character of the show. Like, that's one of the reasons why, like, I think you get to kill him at this, if this is going to be ultimately a 50-something episode show. This is a pretty early stage, but it's like, yeah, that guy can go, because he's like, man, his dad was a piece of shit. But you also understand how much Guel really, like, cared about his dad and wanted to live up to his father's expectations. And the darkness of him, you know, buying into Suletta's whole, if you retreat, you get one, if you advance, you get two thing, and that leading to him, he gets two things. He advances towards Suletta, and he murders his own father. Like, he got two things from that. And showing that, like, this like thing that he has inherited, that like Suletta believes in, can be a curse. Because it is, right? This is one thing I meant to mention earlier on the Lady Prospera thing. But that whole line that Suletta has that she has imparted onto Guel that he has kind of like inherited, the thing that it like makes me think of is like chess. Like it feels like it's like a tactics thing. What you don't want to retreat with your pawn. You want to push forward because it's like, yeah, you might lose this pawn, but you can take your enemy's piece and you move your position forward. You force their next move. So you gain 2. Whereas if you don't, you might retain this piece, so you gain 1, but you haven't moved your position forward. Like, it feels like a thing I would think of if I'm playing fucking Fire Emblem or something. You move forward, you gain 2, you retreat, you get 1. Like, you want to be aggressive in a tactical scenario because you can gain more by pushing the attack. And like, Suletta hasn't taken it that way, but that to me is what that thing means. That's like what her mom is doing, is turning her into a chess piece. It's like, you're a pawn, like you need to move forward for you to perform the function in my overall game that I'm playing. And that, there might be ways in which that philosophy can be good for you, but also like, sometimes you need to back off. Like, sometimes you need to retreat. If the only thing you do is push forward, like, you're not only going to gain things, you're going to lose things too. And that's what you see with Guel, and that kind of sets up also then this kind of darker version you see with Suletta as well, where she has bought into that phrase so much that she doesn't see the price that she's paying by killing that guy in the way she does. Guel is like very useful as a character to kind of build up that arc alongside Suletta.
I was playing Fire Emblem this morning, and there was a part I was having all this trouble at because I was only trying to push forward, and it wasn't until I retreated and regrouped that I won the match. So it's not even necessarily good tactics. There you go. No, but you're right. It is specifically, like, I think I saw someone made a prediction that it's almost like that phrase is like in the Manchurian Candidate or something. It's like the phrase that like activates Suletta. I don't think it's literally that, obviously, because she says it in plenty of moments where she doesn't then go off the grid and kill people. But it is very clearly, I do not think Lady Prospera gave her that piece of advice with the warmth that Suletta gives it to other people. Let's just say that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm,
so more with Guel in the future. Ellen Karas, voiced by Hanai Natsuki. Really, we're talking about several characters here, which is part of why I think you have Hanai Natsuki here, because you need someone with the craziest possible range, and also will probably be on this show throughout its run in different forms, because the actual Elan, we don't know that well. We've only seen a little bit of, including him being a shitty, manipulative bastard in the Shall We Gundam episode. But in the first 6 episodes, we have Nice Boy Clone, which is like the purest version of Hanai Natsuki. He sounds a lot like Tanjiro. He's a good kid who has a horrible fate and dies. And in the first hint that this is a Gundam show.
Yes, yeah. You have your main Ellen, which, he meets his tragic fate. You learn that he's that kind of Cyber New type archetype character in your Gundam show. And then he gets fucking melted while Suletta is waiting for him to go on that date or whatever. It's just such a brutal ending to an episode. And then you get original Ellen, and then you have the second clone Ellen, who I fucking love. We've only seen him in like 2 scenes, because he's in the scene where he interacts with Suletta, and then they show him briefly in episode 12, where he comments on something. I think he's like, he says something about like, Gundam's from Earth. Like, he's seeing some of the footage of what's going on in this battle. It's like, we don't want to fuck with that shit, basically. But the second clone Ellen I love because he's got a fucking cape. Like, they adjusted his character design a little bit, so he's got this much more kind of princely theatrical thing. And then his scene with Suletta where he tries to seduce her is so funny, where like, she's just having none of it. And he just basically ends up pushing her away because he's so aggressive. And he has this line where he says like, "Oseba ichiru na." De what? And like the way that he's like, one more push, and like, she's going to give in, that girl. And like the way he leans into this de what is like, it's a very good Hanai Natsuki touch. It's like he's just the biggest fucking scumbag who's like so confident in his ability to like, manipulate Suletta, and he's completely misread that reaction because Suletta's just like, what the fuck was wrong with him? Like, what has happened to Ellen? Like, she she didn't realize for original Ellen that he was different than the one that she had met, like the in terms of the actual human who is Ellen Saris. She never realized that was a different person. This guy, she's like, what the fuck? Like, is he even the same person, basically? And I thought that scene was great.
It is. And I do love that the two characters Hanai Natsuki has voiced in Gundam was Biscuit last time around and Ellen here. So basically the first character who breaks your heart in both shows.
Yes.
But then also is clearly going to be a villain in this show as well. And yeah, it's some great stuff. Episode 6, which is where you have the duel with Ellen, and then, Ellen had gotten to this point where the clone Ellen had become very cold towards Suletta because he's jealous of her. Like, how does this person have this like relationship with this mobile suit and have this outlook on life and all the things I don't have? And then after the duel sort of softens, but also because he has lost, is going to go get melted. And just the entire final stretch of that episode of her singing Happy Birthday while waiting on the bench and him getting melted. It is the Gundam touch, very much. It's a phenomenal episode of television.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal episode of television, and it's also, if anyone starts to sing Happy Birthday to you in the universe of Witch From Mercury, you gotta shut them the fuck up. It's like, stop.
Yeah.
No, don't sing. No, it's not my birthday. Stop. Because it's a fucking death spell in this world. We've heard Happy Birthday sung twice, and both times someone died.
It's got a 100% sure it will. Yeah, and it is not going to be the last time. I think we can say that confidently. So there you go. And then finally we have Shadik Zanelli, another great name, who very clearly to me is a piece of shit from the moment you meet him. He's just handsome and put together enough that not everyone else has realized it. And over the course of the season we realize, oh yeah, that dude's a bastard. Yeah,
and he definitely feels like he's the one who is set up to be a ongoing antagonist character into the future more directly. Like Ellen and like that whole the pale technologies, that side of it feels like this kind of third party that's probably going to like fuck around. For me, Guel is like, I think he's like this sort of like wandering samurai character or something. It feels like he's what he's going to turn into, where he's going to like his allegiances might sort of float around, but ultimately he'll be a sympathetic or somewhat heroic character. Whereas like Shadik feels like he's going deeper into the darkness, not really like thinking that he knows everything about the world is like so what like the impression you get, but that probably there's a lot about the dynamics of what's going on here that he doesn't really understand. And we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but he's got a very interesting relationship with Miorine where, he clearly like he actually cares about her, because Shadik's whole thing is that he is adopted into the Zanelli family. So he was an orphan or something, and was adopted into this family. And so he is an outsider in the way that like Miorine is an outsider, not because she's obviously not an outsider. This is that her father runs the whole fucking conglomerate, but like nobody really thinks about her or cares about her. She's just like a tool or a trophy to be given around. And so Shadik sees some sort of like simpatico there with her, but doesn't really understand how to push that relationship forward. And so he like ruins it. And then you have that great episode 9 title, If I Could Take One More Step Toward You, Ippo Kimi ni Fumi Dase Tanara. Like, if I could have just taken one more step, like what could have been different? And then the relationship gets cut off. It's really, and then he just goes like full villain, right? Because then right after that, he's plotting to like assassinate her fucking father. So he's clearly pretty quickly given up on whatever that relationship could have been to him.
Yes. And, I always suspected from the very beginning that this dude had more going on there that would be bad. But I think the jump from what is in that arc, as you're talking about, where it's that if I could take one more step towards you, all of that stuff, to what you get in the finale, where he is planning an assassination and dealing with fucking space terrorists and all this stuff. That's quite the leap. That is more than I was expecting. And I think you're right. He will clearly be one of the major villains who will probably die at or near the finale of this show in a battle with Suletta.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that's definitely what it feels like. Because I'm also very interested to see like more with his dad, because that is the one that like we haven't seen much of. I guess we haven't seen Ellen's dad, but we've seen a lot of like the 3 women or whatever that run the Pale Corporation that are that kind of CEO role. And we saw a lot of Guel's dad, including his death. But like Shadik's dad, who's the guy who like really just hates the Gundams, we haven't seen that much of that deal. And I'm really curious to see more about that dynamic, because Shadik is obviously like betraying his father and completely going behind his back in pursuing this whole thing and trying to get the Gundams. Like, he's trying to like, he wants to get the Ariel, he wants to own the Gundam Corporation and all that. And he's also working with an Earth terrorist cell that has 2 Gundams and 2 quote unquote witches piloting those Gundams. So it's like, he is clearly like really deep into this shit. But I think you get the sense that he doesn't actually know the reality of what he's messing with. Yeah,
I think that's probably correct. What other characters do you want to talk about from this first season? Anyone we missed?
We have the two witches from Earth are really good. I mean, we only have them in like 2 episodes basically, but those characters make a big impression, I think. One of them is voiced by Yuki Aoi, who we've seen in a lot of stuff. And yes. So she's the one that we haven't seen actually that much of, because so we've mostly seen the other one. I can't remember the name of that character, but the one that gets in the fight with Suletta. But it is fun to get your like, there is like a world of child soldiers out there that their lives are not dueling at your fancy school and going on dates or all that shit. Like, these are the girls who grew up in the Gundam shows that we know, right? It's one of the things I like about Witch from Mercury is I think it's easy to imagine other Gundam shows like a Zeta Gundam or Gundam Wing or whatever, or like Double Gundam and all that kind of stuff, where you get the show set in that world where your point of view for most of it is sheltered and removed from the larger conflict that's happening, but that larger conflict is out there because those people existed, right? There are people training in pilot academies in the Universal Century and all that kind of stuff, or during the events of Double Gundam that didn't touch this big crazy conflict and all that's actually happening out there, and they were just sort of going through their kind of privileged lives. And it's fun to get this and in this show and actually see that kind of be explored and see that shell start to crack. And those 2 girls are like the main things you get that kind of crack it. That's like, oh, these are like, what if Suletta did not have all the things that it has in Miorine and all these other characters that, you know, even with all the problems they have, they exist at this like top level of society. Suletta's mother is the CEO of the company or whatever that runs the mines in Mercury and all of that. So she lives a very privileged existence, even if obviously there's all this weird shit that she might be a clone or everything. But it's still not the same as being a war orphan that is experimented on so that you can pilot a Gundam that is killing you as you use it. That is like a dark fucking existence that is so far outside the scope of the main characters we know.
Yeah, I'm very curious about all of that. So we have, Noria and Sophie are the 2 characters you were talking about who are witches from Earth, and I suspect we'll see a lot more of them. It was, when we met those characters, I'm like, okay, either these are going to be major characters for the rest of the show, or Suletta's going to kill both of them in a very dark moment. She does not wind up killing either of them yet. She kills a different person in a very dark moment.
Yes.
So we'll see, but I am very curious about them. But I think that covers all the major figures from this first season. There's a lot of people here. What else do you want to talk about with The Witch from Mercury? We wound up covering most of the major plot points. I think it's probably worth talking about the mobile suit action. We talked a little bit earlier about how they do not use 3D for the mobile suits, as you said. But the action sequences are very good. This is not a particularly action-heavy Gundam so far because it is sort of constrained mostly to those duels. Not every episode has one of those. The duels tend to be pretty quick sequences. I think the longest one is probably the group duel with Shadik in episode 9. But they're very impressively done. The sense of fluidity and motion and kineticism is off the charts. I think the choreography is very good. It's very character, focused in how they do these scenes. And I think even though there is not sort of life and death stakes through a lot of these fights, they still manage to have a lot of, good sort of like tension and one-upsmanship and all of that in these scenes.
Yeah, it's really good. Like, the animation is phenomenal, and I think it makes such good use of, like, the gun bits and stuff like that. Like, particularly for Ariel, that's really creative. And I think for me, in terms of action, I do think the highlight is that team fight with Shadik. I think that whole sequence is so well choreographed. And the moment where they use the antidote on Suletta, and then she is able to push further with Ariel to a higher permit score or whatever that like negates that. You have that great, very suggestive cut to Lady Prospera watching the footage, and a tear rolls down her cheek, because this is, of course, the antidote was the thing that got her husband killed, right? And is like the main reason why the Vandalist Institute couldn't fight back in the incident 21 years ago. And so seeing Ariel be able to overcome that so effortlessly, obviously, like it's a pretty great little moment that gives you this little sense of like that human person that is still there somewhere in Lady Prospera behind that mask. But then, of course, I do love that the climax of that fight ultimately is ChuChu winning, right? Because Suletta is able to fight off all the different like girls who have their whole crazy intros of where they're like, it's this whole like idol group of female pilots and stuff, which is a great little concept. And, you know, Suletta dispatches them pretty effortlessly to the point of one of the girls like just shouting at her that she's a monster. And then it comes down to her and Shattuck. Shattuck is like going in for the kill to take out the antenna or whatever. And then ChuChu makes that long distance shot because they eliminated most of the Earth suits, but didn't actually disable them. So they're able to like all prop together and get one working gun so ChuChu can make one last shot. And Miorine knew that Shattuck would try to go and do like finish it himself because he can't trust anybody else. And so that's how Miorine knew that at the end, that would be the time that they could take him out, even though they were like horribly outgunned. I just think that like that whole concept and the story told through that fight, through the action, is really phenomenal. It's to me like the main showcase of for mobile suit action in this show.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that one is extremely well done. You also just get something that I always love, like, you know, with the 00 in the season 2 premiere when it's missing its arm and has the cape. Anytime you get the main mobile suit all fucked up, and that's what happens to Ariel in that fight, where she's eventually, is she fighting with no arms by the end of it, or just one missing?
I don't remember. It's definitely at least one missing.
At least one missing, but the Ariel gets all fucked up, and there's some very good fighting there. It's a fight that Suletta like should have absolutely no business winning because she's one mobile suit against 7 like top of the line, and they have like one great mobile suit in the Ariel. They have ChuChu's, which is probably pretty good, and then they have a bunch of basically just like randos that they got from another house, and they put all those together, and they win the day anyway because Suletta is kind of a monster behind this thing, and ChuChu and Miorine are smart, and it is a very, very good scene. But all the duels are really well done. You know, you have like Elan versus Guel in episode 5 is just a brutal fight where he just basically humiliates Guel, and it's just a cruel battle. I think Guel is an interesting person to watch fight in the early episodes because he's someone you do kind of feel bad for him, especially on a second viewing, because you realize, oh, he is actually really good at this. He's just horrifically unlucky in who he winds up going up against in this series of episodes.
Yeah, it is that thing that, like, I think the implication is that if in episode 3, if his dad hadn't like completely fucked around and put in this AI and all this shit, that Guel maybe could have won that fight because he is really fucking good. It's just that like everyone is fucking around with him. And he's in these like really poorly matched encounters, you know, like he has in the fight with Elan, it's like they're on the moon with the dust or whatever that gets into the joints of his mobile suit, and Elan has like the gun bits, and it's a thing that he's never seen before or never fought this type of mobile suit. So it's like, yeah, it's when he has like a straightforward fight with his own father, he wins it pretty handily. So I think like it is that Guel is supposed to be really good. It's just that he keeps on getting fucked around in these like ridiculous scenarios.
It occurred to me watching the series a second time that in episode 1, if he wasn't such a bullying piece of shit, I might actually feel bad for him because, to be fair, he is fighting an illegal mobile suit. Like, I know Suletta is adorable and everything. She is using, not to her knowledge, but she is using an illegal mobile suit, and that is technically unfair to poor Guel, who is doing a perfectly fine job fighting. He just did not anticipate fighting a Gundam.
Yes, that is a very good point that it is true that Suletta completely is cheating her ass off in these duels. It is true.
But again, Guel is a bullying piece of shit in that episode, so he had what's coming to him. Yeah. But if he had been nice and they had dueled under different circumstances, you might feel bad. And in fact, in all 3 of his fights, he loses to Gundams. We have not seen him fight a just normal mobile suit, because it's the Fair Act he loses to in episode 5.
Yes.
Which Elan like taunts him, saying like, "This is a Gundam, idiot." It's brutal. Poor guy. But Yeah, you feel bad for him as the series goes along because, you know, he did squash some tomatoes and that wasn't nice. But the line from that to killing your own dad in space, Guel didn't deserve that. You know, it's more than he had coming to him. He deserved the slap on the ass and maybe losing the title of holder, but it goes a lot further than that.
Yeah, pour one out for Bob.
For Bob. There's so many things I'm excited for in upcoming seasons. So we've lavished praise on the animation. We've talked a bit about the music. And again, I would just say, like, this is, who's the composer on this? It's Takashi Omama. And It is a great score, top to bottom. It's, I think, you have a lot of, your tracks like in any anime that are reused in places. You also just have a lot of good, unique music in certain scenes, like the instrumental version of Shufuku you talked about when you have our inspirational murder speech by Lady Prospera. There's just a lot of very good music in this thing. And I am very excited for whenever, maybe it'll probably be after this next season airs when we get a proper full soundtrack, because it's going to be fun to listen to.
Yeah, it's a great soundtrack. And of course, we also need to talk about the OP and ED, right?
Yes.
So Shikufuku, which is by one of my favorite Japanese bands, YOASOBI. Such a great band. If people have not listened to some more of their music, phenomenal. Particularly my favorite song of theirs, and I believe in my like Spotify breakdown end of year thing or whatever, said was my most listened to song of 2022 was the song Monster or Kaibutsu by YOASOBI, which was one of the openings to Beastars, I think. But regardless of the anime it was attached to, Monster is a fucking killer song. But yeah, Shikufuku, great opening. Like one I was like very happy. That was like one of the fun things about watching it every week was like, having that like week break between seeing the OPs meant that like I was very excited to like sit down and listen to and watch the full 90-second OP every single time, not looking at my phone or whatever. Because I was like ready and fresh for it. But yeah, YOASOBI is a great band. I think that is like a killer song. And then also the ending theme, which is Kimio Takaku Ade. Kedaku Ade by Shiyui. That is also not as good as Shikufuku. It's hard to beat YOASOBI, but also a very good ending theme.
Yeah, I like both songs, particularly the opening. Neither would go in like my Gundam top 40, if people are wondering.
Yeah, probably
it wouldn't
not
break that high, but they are very good. To be clear, that's a very competitive top 40. At this point, we've got like over 200 songs on that playlist. In particular, though, I think the ending animation I really love. It's all these like kind of like child watercolor drawings of Suletta, and it goes very overt with the Suletta Miorine are in love imagery, and it's very cute, and I think that ending animation is great. I'm with you that I really love that animation. I also, one thing I do like about the opening theme as well is they do change it up a little bit as the season goes on. They add in the witches from Earth in the last couple of episodes and stuff like that, and I thought that was cool. Like little details like that they sort of adjusted the opening slightly as the story went on. I may not have noticed that. I'll have to go back and look at that. That's cool. But yeah, the opening, the whole like driving guitar of that song is just killer, and the way it starts, and then I think the way it ends with, I particularly love the how the title comes up in the opening, where you have Suletta and Miorine kind of both looking like they're asleep, kind of like circling each other, and then the title kind of comes out of that and glows. I think the entire title treatment of Witch from Mercury is like one of my favorite Gundam title treatments. It's very simple. It's not, I don't think they even necessarily like invented a font for it or anything. It's just like, I think the way the kanji look, the way you have the English title in like very plain text right beneath it, there's just something about it that like whenever, because the eye catch in this show is a very simple just throw to title, and it always strikes me that it's a very good title treatment. Yeah,
I agree. I remember being impressed by the title treatment when that was like the only thing we saw, right? Like all it was a logo. You looked at it as like, well, there's not, a lot you can take away from it, but goddamn, this is like a really nice designed logo. And yeah, like the font is really good. The kanji are really well like depicted in how spatially they're laid out on the image. It's a good title.
Well, because I mean, those are some, they're all very common kanji that you'll know if you know even a few. And it's just, there's something about the way they're like drawn with these like very kind of flowing lines that kind of feels magical to me or something. Like there is this like, that's what it like projects that idea of, the majo, or the maho, the actual like witch idea.
Yes.
There's something about that I really like. So Anyway, it's very cool. I also the word suisei is always great. It's basically water star. It's cool. Yeah. So all of it looks very nice. There's a lot here, Sean. Here's a little fun game I want to play before we break for today. I want to go through a list of major characters. Let's predict who survives this series and who dies.
Oh, okay. I think this is hard. We don't even know how long the series is going to be, technically speaking. But
but we can say who's going to be dead at the end of it. Okay. Suletta and Miorine, I think, will live. I don't think this is an Iron-Blooded Orphans, but also I don't think that's completely off the table from what we've seen so far. But no, I don't think this is an Iron-Blooded Orphans.
Of the two of them, I think it's possible that Suletta could die at the end of if one of them were to be killed. I don't think either of them are going to be killed.
No.
But there is also a chance that Suletta is a clone, which also makes her more likely to be killed, I think.
I do. Yes, indeed. Guel, he's dead. He will die at the end.
Yeah, I think he's almost... I feel bad, Bob. It's like, you're a good kid. But I think his number... I don't know. I think it'll be a while, but I think he's going to die.
I think he survives to the last core, whenever that is, but I do think he dies. Elan has a lot of different forms. I think all of them will be dead at the end.
I think there will be one Ellen that will survive. I think that's, I think that's how either it will be the original, which I think would be interesting in and of itself, or there might be an Ellen yet seen that will be an Ellen that survives the fray.
Yeah. Shadik is obviously going to die, but I think he survives close to the end.
Yeah. I think, he's, I think he's going to be a deep in, he gets taken out. Yeah.
Nika, Nanaura.
She's probably going to die, isn't she?
She's going to die. I think she's going to die. There's going to be an arc where we learn about her betrayal, and she feels bad, and in trying to make up for it, she sacrifices herself for the group. That might be like a core 3 kind of thing that we get. But she's dead.
Yeah, she's almost certainly dead. But oh god, I don't want to think about it.
ChuChu.
No. Just no. It's not going to happen. No, it'll be like a mobile suit fight, and then her mobile suit will get disabled, and it seems like she's about to die, and then she kicks the fucking hatch off, jumps out, and just punches the other mobile suit, and it just explodes like in One Punch Man. That's what's gonna happen.
Or maybe that's where we finally get the bat. We see she's got a slot in her cockpit. She takes the bat, kicks the door open, and goes out with the bat.
Oh my god! Great. Yeah, and it's like the thing you sometimes get in Gundam fights where she finds the hatch on the other mobile suit and pulls the lever to pull the cockpit out, and then she just gets in there and fucking beats the other pilot to death with a fucking spiked bat. Yeah. Yes, that's what's gonna happen.
All right. Lauda Neal, who is the other boy at Jeturk House, who is constantly having to deliver the bad news to Guel.
Yeah, the younger brother, who mysteriously has a different last name, which was a detail I noticed on second watch. I think there's a decent chance that he survives. I think he'll be I think he's going to be a villainous character overall. But I think he's going to survive because Guel is going to die. That's my guess.
Yeah. Okay. My prediction is he will die, but I can see your side of it too. Martin Upmont.
It's hard to call. I think there's a good chance that he gets killed. I think there's a good chance that he survives. I think there's a good chance that he ends up getting kind of shuffled out of the show while he is still alive. I think that's true. Where everything becomes too much for him to handle, and eventually the show is going to go pretty far away, I think, from the school setting. I think there's a chance that if Martin lives the show, it'll be because he doesn't keep going with them at a certain point.
What about Nuno Kargan, who is the guy who's got the beanie on all the time while also wearing a hoodie under his uniform? He's more of the bad boy of the group. I feel like maybe he becomes a mobile suit pilot and eats it at some point.
I think he might die. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Ojalo Gable, who is the black boy in the group.
I think there's a chance where there will be an episode where a lot of the it would be a scene where 3 or 4 of the Earth kids get killed in one go. I think if you do something like that, he would die in that scene.
That's true. Lilik, who is the girl who helps them out and is constantly under pressure from Miorine. She lives, I think. That would be really mean to kill her.
Too dark. She has to live for her boyfriend harem that she secretly has.
Yes. All right, now we're running into characters who I do not remember, the minor characters from Earth House. So let's go to other ones. Let's see. Some of these I don't know. Weikling Rembran.
Oh, he's dead.
He's dead. Yeah.
He's so dead. Yeah. I mean, fucking.
He could wind up being a better person. He could wind up being a worse person, but he will be dead at the end of this show.
Yes.
Yeah. Sarius Zanelli, Shadik's dad.
Oh, he's super dead. Yeah.
Super dead.
I think
Imhotep
Shadik might kill
is
him.
already dead. Never mind. Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. Let's see. Belmeria Winston. No, she already died. No, she didn't. She's still there.
No.
She's the girl from the Pale Institute. She'll die. But she might also have a similar arc as a Nina, I think, because she clearly does not feel great about what she's doing at Pale House. So she might be dead. But all the Pale House people will die, I'm sure. Lady Prospera.
Yeah, I think it's hard to imagine that she doesn't get killed. I mean, she's so...
Yes.
I mean, there would have to be a big plot twist about, like, what Quiet Zero is or something about, like, what her ultimate objective is that would allow her to live. But it definitely feels like they're heading towards she's the big bad and she will die in the last episode or whatever.
So you don't think that this show will end with Suletta and Miorine getting married and Lady Prospera in her mask walking Suletta down the aisle?
As fun as it is to hear Mamiko Nota say, like, omedetou gozaimasu, like, in her very, like, terrifyingly calm voice in that scene, no, I don't think it's going to go that way.
And finally, our Dawn of Fold pilots, Norea and Sophie, they're super dead.
They're the Cyber New Type girls. No, the Cyber New Type girls do not survive. Like, that's, we already killed a Cyber New Type boy. It's like, those are the easiest characters to kill off in a Gundam.
Yep. All right. Well, there you have it. We were only confident about 3 or 4 characters living, so that's Gundam for you.
Yeah, and it was a show that for a little bit there, I think I would have been less confident that this show would be super bloodthirsty, but after...
Oh, it's going to be bloodthirsty.
After the very end, the very, very end of episode 12, which if people... or confused about us kind of talking about, she splats a dude like a tomato, and if you didn't watch past the end credits of the last episode of the season, make sure you see that scene. Because I did see some people on Twitter be like, what are people talking about? And go, oh shit. If you're, some anime noobs who don't know, you always watch past the credits, because that's where the most important shit happens.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked around that scene a lot. That scene, we should just end by talking about that scene. Holy shit. I think whatever level of Gundam experience you came into this show with, that's still, like, just passing that line the way they do, it is one of the most graphically violent images in Gundam history. We have seen people get stepped on or splatted by mobile suits before, but it is usually out of frame. So, for instance, in the Kukuru's Doan's Island movie from last year, Amuro steps on someone, but it is specifically done out of frame. We see Amuro's reaction. We do not see a pool of blood and viscous. The splat happens twice. They do it like a fucking Jackie Chan stunt where we just see the thing happen twice in a row. Blood everywhere. Miorine covered in it. The absolute horror of having Suletta then slide down and laughing about how she's a klutz while being covered in this dude's blood, and then offering her hand out, and you have the blood bulbously kind of going out in these like bubbles because it's in space and it's 0G. Like, it is one of the most viscerally upsetting scenes in Gundam history. It's like a scene worthy of like Victory Gundam or something. It's fucked.
Yeah, I think the only thing in Gundam that is even close in terms of the level of gore is there's some stuff in Gundam Seed where they have that super weapon or whatever that causes people to explode. Some of those shots are really graphic in Gundam Seed. Probably the thing this reminds me of a lot, there's a scene in an episode of Eureka 7 that is quite gory that this kind of reminded me of a little bit, and I almost kind of feel like it's a play on that scene in some ways, or like an inversion of it, because Suletta's reaction is the exact opposite of the reaction of the protagonist of Eureka 7 when he sees, oh god, I'm murdering people in this thing and blood everywhere and this is horrifying, and Suletta just sort of rolls with it. It's an amazing ending, because the whole thing with that episode 12 is that it's clearly you're building up the tension, particularly over the course of episode 11. You're getting the tension of seeing the personal relationships in that drama happening in the space station, while all the while this group of terrorists with 2 Gundam girls are like on their way to the station. So like it's ratcheting up the tension so much. And then you go into episode 12 and you have Guel fucking murders his father. All that shit happens. And then you get Suletta getting the speech from the mom about like murdering people is okay. And at that point, I think everyone's assumption, if you've seen Gundam, or even if you haven't seen Gundam, and just like you can read, the normal story pattern would be she then goes out and fights and kills one of the enemy Gundam girls. That I thought for sure that would be what...
That's what I was expecting, yeah. Like, and Sophie is literally, like, taunting and running around because she's like, it's Suletta Mercury. This is the girl we've been hearing about. And I thought for sure the ending would be she gets killed by this person she's following around. Yeah,
and that it would horrify Suletta as she has to, like, actually do this and like really commit to the violence. Then that would be like the standard Gundam scene, and you'd have this kind of more standard Gundam or mecha protagonist development moment where she has to like confront the reality of the violence, and it horrifies her because she's a child. Like, that's the thing you expect to see, and instead that encounter just goes by. And it's like, and it's a complete anticlimax. Like, you know, the aerial comes out, it's souped up. The aerial design there is super cool, but it's also very terrifying. They've taken the kind of more fun, bubbly looking aerial design and made it much more severe looking, and all that. It looks more like a weapon of war. And she's got this giant cannon, and she blows up the legs of that one enemy mobile suit, and they go and retreat, and that's it. And you kind of feel like, oh, that's it. Like, that's the end of the episode, and it goes to credits basically. But then if you're a smart anime viewer, you know, there's probably going to be something more. And if you see the runtime of the episode, yeah, there's more than 90 seconds left. And it comes back up from the ending. And so that the payoff being there, where it's like, after all that shit's done, Suletta comes in, she sees Miorine is being threatened, and then she just splats this dude in this comical fashion. Like Ishino Sekana's line read where she goes, Yamena sai, and she like says it like, hey, stop that, you idiot. Like, basically like, come on, what you doing? And she just splats this dude like a tomato. It is like legitimately like upsetting. Like, it's like it hits you in the stomach, I think, just seeing that, because you're so not expecting it. You're kind of lost it a little bit from the anticlimax of the scene that came before, and then getting confronted with that, and Suletta, it's so far from your expectation, expecting Suletta to be horrified by the violence she does. Instead, she just doesn't care about the violence. She's just like, hey, come on, Miorine, let's go. And, you know, one of the things that's compelling about the scene is that it's hard to blame Suletta for killing that guy, because that guy was going to murder Miorine. So it's like, her using lethal violence against that guy, I don't think is like morally a big deal. Like, I don't think it's hard to make a strong ethical argument that what Suletta did was like really wrong to kill this guy when he was about to murder her best friend and her best friend's father. But the way that she does it and her reaction afterwards is so unsettling that is what pushes Miorine to use the word murderer, hitogoroshi, to describe Suletta. That's like, you murdered somebody. And you're somehow able to smile about it. What a dark, upsetting way to leave the story, but like a perfect way that I think really and elegantly subverts the expectations of the audience and what you kind of expect to have happened based on that build-up.
It's a twist, but it's the kind of twist that, like, you do not see it coming in that way, and it breaks the show in the sense of that now the show like cannot be what it was before that scene. It just, my joke about it comes back and they're eating burgers and it's a joke about ketchup. You can't do that after this scene. You know, you have to do something else next time. But it doesn't break the show in the sense that it broke the rules of the show. I think when you look at it, it makes total sense, and that's what's kind of scary about it. And but it does leave me like, I'm so curious what is the next scene? What is the next episode when you have crossed this boundary that firmly and dropped the mic that hard? Because the show can never be exactly what it was before.
Yeah.
Like, we have not, one thing we haven't talked about yet is the absolutely delightful, wonderful Gundam song and commercial they make in, I think, episode 8. And Suletta doing the fun dance and talking about Ariel, it can dance, it can fly, and all of that. It will be very hard to do a similar version of that scene next time around, you know?
Yeah, it can dance, it can fly, it can kill Ariel.
Yeah, they got footage from the cockpit of her splatting that dude, and they put it in the next commercial. Oh, my God. Yeah. I do have some news here, Sean. I think we may have broken Thomas, making him watch Gundam show. Not making him, but I have suggested to him watching mini Gundam shows, and he constantly ends them calling me and being just distraught and sad because of all the bad things that happen. And I think it's changed his anime viewing habits, where he's become a huge fan of like slice of life, very low stakes anime. He's become someone who's gaining an encyclopedic knowledge of all of that. And I don't know if the causality has always been, he may have been starting to get into those before he watched like OG Gundam, but it's definitely like, Gundam upsets him a lot. And his whole thing with this one is, the other day he texted me and said, "Good news, I found a simple slice of life anime to unwind from Gundam." This one is Ahere-san wa Hakarenai from a couple years ago. I have not seen this one. But I have known after Gundam, he's seen Gundam, Zeta, Double Zeta, and Char's Counterattack, and I'm fairly confident he has picked up a different small-scale slice of life show after every single one of those, especially Double Zeta breaking his heart with Puru, who was his favorite character, and he had to see her die several times.
Has he watched Unicorn Gundam yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had Sean, me having to keep quiet, because his joke now with every Gundam show is, do they kill Puru in this one? And when he asked me about Unicorn, me biting my lip and like, what do I say? I don't want to lie, because yes, but no, he has seen Unicorn Gundam. That upset. He really liked Unicorn Gundam, but he was mad they killed Puru again. And I had to like promise him, no, there is no Puru. This is a different continuity. You will like G-Witch. But also, I started recommending it to him before this final episode, and then I felt a little bit like Thomas is going to have to pick up another slice of life show.
I mean, hey, the thing I watched after finishing G-Witch is I started watching this show that I'm almost done with now, called Do It Yourself. It's very fun. It just aired last season. It's about high school girls at a school joining the do-it-yourself or DIY club, and it's all about them going and making like fun arts and crafts projects and like making a bench and going to the beach and getting shells and stuff so they can make and sell necklaces so they can build a tree house together at the school to have their club in. It's fucking great. And nobody gets murdered like they're a fucking tomato. It's awesome.